to found the first Hells Angels charter in Fontana, California. While Friedli downplayed his role, history names him the architect of this feared global brotherhood. Shifting power in 1958, Sonny Barger took the reins, incorporating the club in 1966 and expanding it into a highly disciplined multi-chapter empire through strict vetting processes and aggressive trademark enforcement. The Fontana split and the man behind the Hells Angels. The story of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club began in the aftermath of the infamous Hollister era. On March 17, 1948, the club officially established its first charter in Fontana, California, near San Bernardino. At the center of that moment was Otto Friedli, a World War II veteran who had grown frustrated with the constant internal disputes and outside conflicts surrounding the pissed-off bastards of Bloomington. Born in Madison, Wisconsin, on June 28, 1931, Friedli moved to Southern California while he was still young. Even early in life, he had a rebellious streak and little patience for authority. He enlisted in the United States Army, but his military career came to an abrupt end when officials discovered he had a criminal record and discharged him. As tensions continued to grow within the POBOB, Friedli and several members who shared his outlook decided to break away. Their goal was to build something stronger and more organized. That split would eventually lead to the creation of what became one of the most feared biker organizations in the world. Years later, Friedli often downplayed his role in the club's creation. In interviews, he described the early Hells Angels as nothing more than just a bunch of guys who liked to have fun and ride motorcycles rather than a structured organization. But historical accounts and law enforcement records tell a different story. Those records consistently identify Friedli as the key figure behind the early Fontana and San Bernardino chapters, and one of the main architects of the club's foundation. As the Hells Angels expanded, Friedli found himself dealing with growing territorial rivalries and increasing attention from law enforcement. In 1961, after San Bernardino chapter president Bobby Zimmerman was killed in a motorcycle crash, Friedli stepped in and took over leadership of the chapter. His time at the top would not last forever. During the mid-1960s, authorities raided his Cucamonga ranch and discovered a firearm that led to his conviction. Friedli was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, a punishment that would completely change the direction of his life. While incarcerated, he spent much of his time reading the Bible. The experience had a profound effect on him. By the time he was released, he had walked away from the outlaw biker lifestyle that had once defined him. He later joined the Santa Barbara Black Sheep Motorcycle Ministry and earned a living working as a Harley-Davidson mechanic. On March 17, 2008, exactly 60 years after the founding of the Hells Angels, Otto Friedli passed away. In a final reminder of his unique personality, his gravestone carried the inscription, "Bye-bye suckers, see you in heaven." Although Friedli's role in founding the Hells Angels is widely accepted, the club's early history is not without debate. Some accounts point to another founding effort that allegedly took place on November 15, 1951, in San Bernardino. According to these sources, Dick White and members of the Redlands Roadrunners played a major role in forming a parallel organization. These competing stories reveal just how fragmented California's biker scene was before Sonny Barger eventually helped bring the organization together under a unified identity. The origins of the name and the rise of the Death Head. The name Hells Angels and the club's famous imagery were not created out of thin air. Both were heavily influenced by military aviation and wartime history. According to the club's official history, the name was suggested by Arvid Olsen, a close associate of the founders. Olsen had served as a squadron leader with the Flying Tigers, specifically the 3rd Pursuit Squadron of the American Volunteer Group in China. during World War II. Another important influence came from the legendary Hells Angels, B-17F, Flying Fortress bomber, commanded by I.R.L. Baldwin of the 303rd Bombardment Group. The aircraft flew dangerous combat missions over occupied Europe during the war. Both military units had borrowed their names from Howard Hughes's groundbreaking 1930 aviation film, Hells Angels, which followed the lives of World War I fighter pilots. Among all individuals connected to the founding of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, Olson remains the only documented figure with a direct military connection to those famous wartime units. As the club developed its own identity, members needed a symbol that represented who they were. That led to the creation of the iconic Death's Head insignia, a skull wearing an aviator cap surrounded by feathered wings. The design drew heavy inspiration from military patches used by the 85th Fighter Squadron and the 552nd Medium Bomber Squadron. The version recognized around the world today was refined by Frank Sadilek, a former president of the San Francisco chapter. He is credited with designing the official Death's Head patch that the club later registered and trademarked in 1966. The club's image became even more recognizable when the Oakland chapter introduced a larger version of the patch in 1959. Members nicknamed it the Barger Larger, a tribute to the growing influence of Sonny Barger and the Oakland Charter. Combined with their customized Harley-Davidson motorcycles, black leather jackets, and increasingly intimidating reputation, the Death's Head became one of the most recognizable symbols in biker culture. The image of the outlaw biker exploded into the public spotlight after the release of the 1953 Hollywood film, The Wild One, starring Marlon Brando and Lee Marvin. The movie introduced mainstream audiences to the rebellious biker lifestyle and helped turn motorcycle clubs into a cultural phenomenon. At the same time, it attracted a new generation of recruits looking for freedom, rebellion, and brotherhood. But it also caught the attention of authorities. As the Hells Angels continued to grow, organizations such as J. Edgar Hoover's Federal Bureau of Investigation began watching the outlaw biker movement more closely, setting the stage for decades of conflict between the club and law enforcement. Sonny Barger, the man who built the Hells Angels empire. From a troubled childhood to the open road, the Hells Angels had already been established before Sonny Barger arrived on the scene. But it was Barger who transformed the club from a loose collection of California biker groups into a powerful organization with influence far beyond state lines. Born Ralph Hubert, Sonny Barger Jr., on October 8, 1938, in Modesto, California, his early life was far from stable. When he was just 4 months old, his mother, Catherine Rich, walked away from the family. Sonny and his older sister were left to be raised by their father, Ralph Sr., along with a strict Pentecostal grandmother. His father spent long hours working at the Port of Oakland, loading ships and cargo trucks. Young Sonny often tagged along and found himself surrounded by waterfront bars, rough laborers, and hard-living men. Those environments left a lasting impression on him and helped shape the attitude he would carry throughout his life. School never interested him much. He regularly challenged authority, got into fights, and even received a suspension after striking a teacher. Eventually, after finishing the 10th grade, he quit school altogether. Looking for something different, Barger altered his birth certificate and enlisted in the United States Army at just 16 years old. For a while, he found the discipline and brotherhood he had been searching for. But the military eventually discovered his real age, and a little over a year later, he was honorably discharged. Back in Oakland, Barger moved from one labor job to another, yet something was missing. The sense of loyalty, structure, and belonging he had experienced in the Army was gone. In 1956, he joined his first motorcycle club, the Oakland Panthers. The experience didn't last long. He felt the club lacked organization and discipline, so he walked away. Soon afterward, he began riding with a group of hard-drinking military veterans, including Don Boots Reeves. Reeves wore an old patch from a now-defunct Sacramento Nomads chapter of the Hells Angels. The name, the image, and the reputation immediately caught Barger's attention. On April 1, 1957, Barger, Reeves, and several associates founded the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels. They had replica Death's Head patches produced at a trophy shop in Hayward, California, and adopted them as the chapter's official colors. That decision would change biker history forever, turning a collection of chapters into one organization. Under Sonny Barger's leadership, the Oakland chapter quickly gained influence. A chance meeting with a member of an older Southern California Hells Angels chapter introduced Barger to the club's wider history. Once he understood how many independent chapters existed across California, he began working towards something much bigger, a unified organization. In 1958, following a series of meetings with Southern California members, Barger became president of the Oakland chapter. That same year, a major shift occurred. Otto Friedli, founder of the original San Bernardino chapter, was sent to prison. With Friedli no longer able to lead, Barger effectively became the organization's national figurehead. One of his first major moves was relocating the club's mother chapter from San Bernardino to Oakland. It was far more than a simple change of address. The move shifted the center of power to Northern California and established Oakland as the administrative heart of the Hells Angels. From that point forward, the Oakland chapter became the club's most influential branch and the unofficial authority over the growing network. Barger then began reshaping the organization from the ground up. He divided territories, standardized club rules, introduced formal bylaws, and created strict requirements for opening new chapters. Membership standards also became more structured, with potential recruits facing a more organized vetting process before earning acceptance. Although individual chapters maintained a degree of independence, Oakland occupied a unique position within the club. It became the chapter that others looked to for leadership, largely because of its size and Sonny Barger's growing reputation. That influence became even stronger in September 1963, during a highly publicized confrontation involving local police and the California Highway Patrol in Porterville, California. The Oakland chapter successfully coordinated a united response involving multiple Hells Angels chapters. The incident demonstrated something that had never been seen before, a level of coordination that transformed the Hells Angels from scattered biker groups into a disciplined organization capable of acting as a single force, protecting the patch at all costs. As the Hells Angels expanded, Barger became increasingly focused on protecting the club's identity and reputation. During the early years, women had played various social and supportive roles around the club. But in 1964, Barger introduced a rule that permanently prohibited women from becoming members or wearing official Hells Angels patches. His reasoning was based on security rather than tradition. Within outlaw motorcycle culture, a club's colors, the patches worn on members' vests, carry enormous significance. They represent the club's identity, territory, and honor. If a rival gang managed to take those patches through violence, the loss could be viewed as a major humiliation. In some cases, it could even threaten the future of an entire chapter. Barger believed that female associates carrying club colors or traveling alone while wearing patches could become targets for rival biker gangs looking to seize Hells Angels insignia. To eliminate what he viewed as a security risk, he enforced a strict male-only membership policy. The decision further strengthened the image that would come to define the Hells Angels, a tightly controlled brotherhood built around loyalty, discipline, and a highly masculine culture where protecting the patch was considered one of the highest priorities of all. How the Hells Angels turned their name into a weapon. By the mid-1960s, Sonny Barger understood something that many outlaw motorcycle clubs had never considered. Power wasn't only built on the streets, it could also be built in courtrooms. In 1966, under Barger's leadership, the Hells Angels took a remarkable step that set them apart from nearly every other biker club in the world. The organization formally incorporated in California as the Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation. At first glance, it seemed like a simple legal move. In reality, it was a major strategic decision. By becoming a corporation, the club gained the ability to legally protect its identity. The Hells Angels trademarked their name, the Hells Angels wording, and their most recognizable symbol, the Death's Head logo. It was an unusual situation. A group that law enforcement agencies frequently described as an organized crime syndicate was now using legitimate intellectual property law to defend its brand, and they were prepared to enforce those rights aggressively. The first major test came on October 26, 1989. The Hells Angels filed a trademark infringement lawsuit in federal court in Los Angeles against Concord New Horizons, a production company owned by legendary B-movie filmmaker Roger Corman. The lawsuit also targeted Media Home Entertainment, the company distributing the film on video. The dispute centered on a movie called Nam Angels. According to the Hells Angels, the filmmakers had used protected elements of the club's identity without permission. The club argued that its trademarked name and imagery had been infringed upon. Rather than dragging on through a lengthy court battle, the case ended in a settlement that strongly favored the Hells Angels. More importantly, it sent a message. The club was willing to fight not only with intimidation and reputation, but also with lawyers and legal documents. That approach soon expanded. Using their corporate status, the Hells Angels threatened legal action against major television networks and successfully challenged the broadcast of The Last Chapter, a production centered on outlaw biker culture. Once again, the club argued that its trademarks had been violated. This combination of street power and corporate litigation became one of the organization's most effective survival tools. While rivals fought over territory, the Hells Angels were also protecting their image through the legal system, giving them influence in places far beyond the biker world. When the counterculture embraced the Hells Angels. During the mid to late 1960s, the Hells Angels found themselves in an unexpected position. They became closely connected to the rapidly growing counterculture movement centered around San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. At the time, many journalists, writers, musicians, and political activists viewed the outlaw bikers through a romantic lens. To many people within the anti-establishment movement, the Hells Angels appeared to represent pure freedom. They were seen as rebels who refused to follow society's rules, men who lived entirely on their own terms. Left-wing intellectuals, anti-war protesters, and psychedelic rock musicians often described the bikers as symbols of authentic resistance against what they saw as an increasingly corporate and conformist America. The Hells Angels became regular faces at rallies and public gatherings. They provided security at concerts and spent time around some of the biggest names of the era, including the Grateful Dead, Allen Ginsberg, and Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters. But beneath the surface, the relationship rested on a dangerous misunderstanding. Many members of the counterculture believed the Hells Angels were partners in a peaceful social revolution. The bikers saw things very differently. While hippies promoted peace, love, and social change, the Hells Angels remained a disciplined, tightly knit, and often violent brotherhood. To many members, the middle-class hippie movement was something to be used rather than embraced. The two worlds appeared connected, but they were never truly the same. That illusion would collapse in dramatic fashion before the decade ended. Altamont, the day everything fell apart. On December 6, 1969, the fragile relationship between the Hells Angels and the counterculture movement came crashing down at the Altamont Free concert. The event was organized by the Rolling Stones and was intended to be the West Coast's answer to Woodstock. Held at the Altamont Speedway in Northern California, the concert attracted an enormous crowd and promised a day of music, celebration, and unity. Instead, it became one of the darkest moments in rock and roll history. Looking for an inexpensive security force, organizers accepted a recommendation from the Grateful Dead and hired members of the Hells Angels. Their reported payment was simple, approximately $500 worth of beer. From the beginning, the venue presented serious problems. The stage was built unusually low, standing less than 4 feet above the ground. That design allowed hundreds of thousands of spectators to push directly toward the performers. As more than 300,000 people packed into the area, tensions steadily increased. Alcohol flowed freely. Low-quality drugs circulated through the crowd. The atmosphere became increasingly unpredictable. The Hells Angels, many of whom were also heavily intoxicated, took responsibility for maintaining order around the stage. They created a strict perimeter and aggressively enforced it. Armed with weighted pool cues and motorcycle chains, club members struck anyone they believed was getting too close. The violence became impossible to ignore. During a performance by Jefferson Airplane, lead singer Marty Balin stepped in to defend a fan who was being confronted by bikers. Moments later, a Hells Angel knocked him unconscious. What had started as isolated confrontations quickly escalated into chaos. The situation reached its breaking point during the Rolling Stones performance. Near the front of the stage stood 18-year-old Meredith Murdoch Hunter, an African-American concertgoer carrying a long-barreled .22 caliber revolver. As tensions exploded in the crowd, Hunter drew the weapon. Within seconds, Hells Angels member Alan Pissarro moved toward him. Pissarro immediately disarmed Hunter and stabbed him to death in front of thousands of spectators. The killing was captured on film, turning Altamont into a defining moment, not only in Hells Angels history, but also in the story of the American counterculture itself. For many observers, that day marked the end of the idealistic dream that had defined the 1960s. The image of peace, love, and unity collided with violence and reality, and the illusion never fully recovered. When the Rolling Stones realized they had lost control, the chaos at Altamont wasn't limited to the crowd. Behind the stage, the situation had become just as dangerous. As violence erupted in front of tens of thousands of spectators, members of the Rolling Stones found themselves trapped in a situation they could no longer control. Keith Richards, the band's lead guitarist, watched as concertgoers were assaulted near the stage. Alarmed by what was unfolding, he attempted to stop the performance and reportedly refused to continue playing until the Hells Angels backed off and the violence ended. But according to Sonny Barger, the Hells Angels had no intention of taking orders from the band. In his autobiography and later police interviews, Barger claimed that one Hells Angel aimed a loaded handgun directly at Richards and warned him that if he tried to leave the stage, he would be shot. Barger went even further with his account. He stated that he personally stood behind Mick Jagger while pressing a gun into Keith Richards' side, forcing the Rolling Stones to continue their performance despite the chaos surrounding them. Whether viewed as crowd control or outright intimidation, the result was the same. As violence unfolded around the stage, one of the biggest rock bands in the world continued performing while allegedly facing the immediate threat of deadly force. For those on stage, Altamont had become something far more frightening than a concert gone wrong: the radio defense and the war of public opinion. When the concert ended, the damage to the Hells Angels' public image was immediate. News reports painted the club as the face of the violence that had turned Altamont into a disaster. Public criticism intensified, and the Hells Angels suddenly found themselves under a national spotlight. Sonny Barger responded by taking his argument directly to the public. Shortly after the event, he called into KSAN, one of the Bay Area's most influential radio stations, and presented the club's version of what had happened. Barger refused to accept responsibility. Instead, he blamed the Rolling Stones and the event organizers. According to him, the stage had been built far too low, allowing the crowd to push directly against the performers. He also accused the band of intentionally creating what he described as a dark and intimidating atmosphere for their performance of Sympathy for the Devil. Barger argued that the Hells Angels had been used as convenient scapegoats. In his view, the band wanted someone else to absorb the blame for a poorly organized event. He also claimed that the violence did not begin until members of the crowd started damaging motorcycles belonging to the Hells Angels. As Barger put it, "We're not cops. We went there to sit on the stage and drink beer, and when they started pushing our bikes, we beat the fuck out of them." It was a blunt defense that reflected exactly how the club viewed the situation: the $50,000 dispute and the alleged revenge plot. The fallout from Altamont permanently destroyed any remaining relationship between the Hells Angels and the Rolling Stones. Meanwhile, Alan Pissarro faced criminal charges for the killing of Meredith Hunter. The case became one of the most closely watched trials connected to the concert. During the proceedings, footage from the documentary film Gimme Shelter was introduced as evidence. The film showed that Hunter had drawn a handgun moments before the confrontation. Based on that evidence, Pissarro was acquitted after the court accepted his claim of self-defense. But even though the criminal case ended, another conflict was just beginning. Defending Pissarro had generated enormous legal costs. The Hells Angels reportedly demanded that the Rolling Stones cover $50,000 in legal expenses. Their argument was simple: the band's poor planning and security decisions had created the conditions that led to the tragedy. The Rolling Stones refused. According to later reports, that refusal sparked discussions within the club about retaliation. One alleged plan involved assassinating Mick Jagger at his vacation property in Long Island, New York. The plot was reportedly never carried out successfully, and Jagger was never harmed. Still, the allegation demonstrated how deeply the bitterness surrounding Altamont continued long after the concert itself had ended. The day the 60s died. For many cultural observers, Altamont became a symbol. Writers, historians, and critics often described it as the end of the hippie dream, and the moment the optimism of the 1960s finally collapsed. The event seemed to expose the darker side of a movement built around peace, love, and freedom. But Sonny Barger had little patience for those interpretations. He dismissed such descriptions as intellectual crap and bullshit. To him, there was nothing historically symbolic about Altamont. In his view, it was simply another day involving the Hells Angels. As Barger bluntly described it, the concert was just another Hells Angels event. How the Hells Angels build loyalty before membership. One of the biggest reasons the Hells Angels have survived for decades is their ability to carefully control who enters the Brotherhood. Unlike many organizations that openly recruit, the Hells Angels use a long and demanding process designed to test every aspect of a potential member's character. The goal is simple. Before someone gains access to the club's inner circle, members want to know whether that person can be trusted, whether they will remain loyal under pressure, and whether they can follow the club's code without hesitation. The journey begins as a hang-around. At this stage, the individual is allowed to attend public rides, gatherings, and club events. Members observe how the candidate behaves, who they associate with, and whether they fit into the culture. Those who pass this first stage may eventually become an associate. This period often lasts 1 to 2 years. Associates are expected to help wherever needed. They perform basic tasks, assist with club activities, and spend significant time proving their loyalty. The next phase is where things become far more serious. A candidate becomes a prospect. Among Hells Angels members, this is considered the ultimate test. Prospects face constant scrutiny. They have little authority and are expected to follow instructions from full patch members without question. According to numerous accounts, prospects may be required to handle dangerous assignments, transport illegal weapons, drive getaway vehicles, or participate in street-level enforcement activities. Despite carrying responsibilities, they possess very few rights within the club. They cannot vote on chapter matters and are only allowed to wear a partial set of colors. Typically, this consists of a bottom rocker displaying their location and an MC patch. The final step is becoming a full member. To receive full patch status, every active member of the chapter must vote unanimously in favor of the candidate. Only then can the individual wear the complete 4-piece patch set, including the famous Death's Head logo and the top rocker bearing the Hells Angels name. The process can take years, but it serves a purpose. By the time someone earns those colors, they have already demonstrated total commitment to the club's rules, culture, and expectations. Hunter S. Thompson goes inside the Brotherhood. Few outsiders ever managed to get as close to the Hells Angels as journalist Hunter S. Thompson. During the mid-1960s, Thompson spent roughly a year riding, drinking, and socializing with members of the San Francisco and Oakland chapters. His introduction came through Bernie Jarvis, a former Hells Angels member, who later worked as a police beat reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. From the beginning, Thompson made no attempt to hide who he was. He openly told members that he was a journalist, that honesty was risky. The Hells Angels had a deep distrust of reporters and outsiders, and many journalists were viewed as enemies. Yet Thompson persisted. While gathering material for what would become his landmark 1966 book, Hells Angels, A Strange and Terrible Saga, he frequently welcomed club members into his apartment at 318 Parnassus Avenue in San Francisco. The visits quickly became impossible for neighbors to ignore. Custom motorcycles lined the street outside while groups of bikers gathered at all hours, turning the quiet neighborhood into a temporary Hells Angels hangout. The atmosphere could become tense. On several occasions, members jokingly threatened Thompson with physical violence. Thompson responded in a way that earned their attention. Pointing to a loaded double-barreled shotgun hanging on his wall, he calmly warned that he would croak 2 of them first. The remark wasn't forgotten. The display of confidence and willingness to stand his ground earned him a level of respect that few outsiders ever achieved. That respect allowed Thompson to continue documenting the club from the inside, producing one of the most influential first-hand accounts ever written about the Hells Angels. The incident that ended. Hunter S. Thompson's access. For nearly a year, Hunter S. Thompson had managed to do something few outsiders ever accomplished. He lived alongside members of the Hells Angels, rode with them, drank with them, and earned enough trust to witness the club from the inside. But that relationship eventually came to a violent end. The breaking point came when Thompson witnessed a member known as Junkie George brutally assaulting his wife. Unlike many bystanders who might have looked away, Thompson stepped in. He openly challenged the behavior, declaring, "Only a punk beats his wife and dog." The statement crossed a line. Within the Hells Angels, loyalty to members often outweighed everything else. According to the club's internal rules, specifically bylaws 10 and 11, When a Hells Angel became involved in a physical confrontation with a non-member, every other member present was expected to join in. What followed was known inside the club as a stomping. The attack was immediate and coordinated. Multiple members punched and kicked Thompson as he was overwhelmed by the group. During the assault, one biker reportedly circled nearby carrying a 20-pound rock and looked for an opportunity to crush Thompson's skull. The beating continued until senior members finally ordered it to stop. Only then did the violence end. Later, in letters sent to Paul Simonin and Sonny Barger, Thompson reflected on the incident. He noted that many of the men who attacked him were not the longtime members with whom he had formed relationships over the previous year. Instead, he believed many of the attackers were newer recruits who were more aggressive and eager to prove themselves. Over the years, some critics have suggested that Thompson exaggerated the incident to help sell books. The evidence suggests otherwise. His injuries were severe, and immediately afterward he was effectively cut off from the club's social circle. Whatever friendship had existed between Thompson and the Hells Angels was over. The incident revealed an important truth about the organization. No matter how much access an outsider was given, they remained an outsider. When club loyalty was tested, even someone as trusted as Thompson could instantly become a target. The Quebec Biker War. When violence became a business strategy. If there was ever a conflict that demonstrated the full scale of Hells Angels' power, it was the Quebec Biker War. Between 1994 and 2002, the province of Quebec became the battleground for one of the deadliest organized crime conflicts in North American history. At its core, the war was about control. Control of territory, control of distribution, and most importantly, control of the narcotics market. The origins of the conflict stretched back to the early 1980s and a friendship that eventually turned into a rivalry. At the center of that story were Maurice "Mom" Boucher and Salvatore Cazzetta. At the time, both men were leaders of a violent white supremacist motorcycle gang operating in Montreal's Pointe-aux-Trembles district. The gang was known simply as the SS. For years, the two worked closely together. Then, everything changed. The massacre that divided two friends. On March 24, 1985, one of the most shocking events in Canadian biker history took place. The Quebec Hells Angels were dealing with a financial dispute involving their Laval chapter. To resolve the problem, senior members invited 5 Laval bikers to a clubhouse in Sherbrooke. The meeting was a trap. Once inside, all 5 men were shot and killed. Their bodies were wrapped in sleeping bags, tied to weightlifting plates, and dumped into the St. Lawrence River. The event became known as the Lennoxville Massacre. For Maurice Boucher, the killings represented something important. He viewed the operation as proof of the discipline and ruthlessness required to build a criminal empire. The following year, he joined the Hells Angels and quickly climbed through the ranks. Eventually, he became president of Quebec's Elite Nomads chapter. Salvatore Cazzetta saw the massacre very differently. To him, murdering fellow club members crossed a line that could never be justified. When Boucher later invited him to join the Hells Angels, Cazzetta refused. Instead, he and his brother Giovanni founded a rival organization in 1986 called the Rock Machine. For several years, an uneasy peace remained in place. One major reason was Cazzetta's strong connections to the Montreal Mafia, relationships the Hells Angels were unwilling to challenge directly. The rise of the Rock Machine. Unlike the Hells Angels, the Rock Machine operated differently. Investigative reporting and criminological studies, including research by Peter Edwards, suggest that during its early years, many members weren't even required to own motorcycles. Rather than functioning as a traditional biker club, the organization operated more like a network of independent drug trafficking groups. Members wore rings featuring an eagle insignia instead of emphasizing motorcycle culture. The group's real focus was business, and that business was drugs. The Rock Machine gained influence by undercutting competitors. Their cocaine sold for significantly lower prices than Hells Angels supplies, allowing them to capture a large share of Montreal's narcotics market. Everything changed in 1994. That year, Salvatore Cazzetta was arrested while allegedly attempting to import 200 kilograms of cocaine from the United States. His arrest created a power vacuum. Maurice Boucher immediately recognized an opportunity. The Hells Angels began pressuring independent drug dealers throughout Montreal, demanding that they buy exclusively from Hells Angels suppliers, often at significantly higher prices. Many refused. That resistance led to the formation of a powerful anti-Hells Angels coalition. The birth of the Alliance. Under the leadership of Claude Vézina, the Rock Machine joined forces with several other criminal groups. These included the Pelletier clan, the Palmers, and a shadowy financial network known as the Dark Circle. Together, they formed a coalition called the Alliance to Fight the Angels. Each group had a specific role. The Rock Machine and the Pelletier clan supplied fighters and street-level operatives. The Dark Circle supplied money, lots of it. That funding allowed the Alliance to acquire weapons, explosives, and the resources needed for a prolonged conflict. The stage was now set for war. Montreal turns into a battlefield. What followed was unlike anything Quebec had experienced before. Over the next 8 years, the conflict escalated into a campaign of relentless violence. Authorities recorded 84 bombings, more than 130 cases of arson, dozens of targeted shootings carried out in broad daylight. The Hells Angels demonstrated an alarming willingness to use sophisticated tactics: remote-controlled car bombs, military-grade explosives, professional hit squads. Nothing appeared off-limits. In April 1999, the situation reached another shocking level. A bomb maker linked to the Hells Angels allegedly planted 5 powerful explosive devices outside 5 separate police stations in Montreal. The attacks could have caused enormous destruction. Only faulty detonators, damaged by moisture, prevented the bombs from exploding. The death that changed everything. For years, much of the violence remained confined to the criminal underworld. Then, an innocent child was killed. On August 9, 1995, 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers was playing in a residential neighborhood in Montreal. Nearby sat a parked Jeep. Unknown to the people around it, the vehicle had become part of a deadly plan. A remote-controlled shrapnel bomb had been planted by Hells Angels operatives, targeting an Alliance-associated drug runner connected to the Jeep. The bomb exploded. The blast tore apart the vehicle and sent metal fragments flying through the neighborhood. One piece of shrapnel struck Daniel Desrochers in the head. His injuries were fatal. The death of an 11-year-old child shocked Quebec. Public anger exploded. Whatever outlaw mystique biker gangs once possessed disappeared almost overnight. To many citizens, these groups no longer looked like rebels or anti-establishment outlaws. They looked like highly organized criminal organizations, willing to endanger anyone standing in their way. The government strikes back. The public reaction forced authorities to act. Facing enormous pressure, the Canadian federal government and Quebec law enforcement agencies launched an unprecedented crackdown. New anti-gang legislation was introduced, including measures commonly associated with the C-95 bill. At the same time, police created specialized multi-jurisdictional task forces dedicated to dismantling biker organizations from the top down. The objective was no longer simply arresting individual members. The goal was to destroy the leadership structures that had allowed groups like the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine to operate for years. After nearly a decade of bloodshed, the Quebec Biker War had transformed from a battle between rival gangs into a major national law enforcement campaign, forever changing the relationship between biker clubs and Canadian authorities. The Rock Machine joins the Bandidos. By the late 1990s, the balance of power in Quebec was beginning to shift. Years of violence had taken a heavy toll on the Rock Machine. Constant police pressure, endless investigations, mounting legal expenses, and large-scale asset seizures were draining the organization. The reality was becoming impossible to ignore. They were badly outnumbered, and fighting a prolonged war against the Hells Angels was becoming increasingly unsustainable. The leadership of the Rock Machine knew they needed help. Their solution was to reach beyond Canada and seek protection from one of the Hells Angels' most powerful international enemies, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. Originally founded in the United States, the Bandidos had grown into a global organization and were already viewed as one of the few biker syndicates capable of challenging Hells Angels' influence on an international level. The transition did not happen overnight. Instead, it unfolded through several carefully planned stages. In May 1999, Rock Machine members were granted hang-around status with the Bandidos. On December 1, 2000, they advanced to probationary chapter status. Then, on December 1, 2001, the process was finalized through a formal patchover. Remaining Rock Machine members surrendered their old identity and officially became full-patch Bandidos. The move created headlines throughout the biker world. But it came too late. The fall of Maurice Boucher. By the time the merger was completed, the Quebec biker war had already left a devastating trail of destruction. When the conflict finally wound down in 2002, the numbers were staggering. A total of 162 people had lost their lives. Hundreds more had been injured. More than 100 key participants from both sides had been sent to prison. At the center of it all stood Maurice "Mom" Boucher. For years, Boucher had built a reputation as one of the most feared and influential figures in Canadian organized crime. Eventually, however, law enforcement caught up with him. Boucher was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder for ordering the targeted killings of 2 Quebec prison guards. Prosecutors argued that the murders were designed to intimidate and destabilize the Canadian justice system itself. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. He was sent to the Supermax prison in Saint-Anne-de-Plaine, where he spent years surviving multiple assassination attempts from rival inmates and enemies. On July 10, 2022, Maurice Boucher died from cancer. The man who had once helped shape one of the bloodiest biker wars in North American history died behind prison walls. The Great Nordic Biker War. While Quebec was descending into chaos, another biker conflict was exploding on the opposite side of the Atlantic. Between January 1994 and September 1997, Northern Europe became the scene of a brutal struggle that would become known as the Great Nordic Biker War. The conflict spread across Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. Like the war in Quebec, the fighting was ultimately about money and control. The prize was access to some of the most profitable smuggling routes in Scandinavia, including routes used for narcotics, weapons, and black market goods. For decades, the region's motorcycle culture had been dominated by small local clubs, focused primarily on riding and bike customization. That changed when the Hells Angels arrived in Scandinavia in 1980. Over time, the club expanded its influence, absorbing smaller organizations and establishing dominance over much of the biker scene. Not everyone accepted that control. Several independent clubs decided to unite and look for outside support. They found it in the Bandidos. After establishing their first European chapter in Marseille, France, in 1989, the Bandidos expanded into Scandinavia in 1993. For the Hells Angels, This was more than competition. It was a direct challenge to territory they considered exclusively theirs. The response was immediate, and it was violent. When biker wars started looking like military conflicts, the Great Nordic Biker War stands apart from most organized crime conflicts because of the weapons involved. This was not simply a war fought with pistols and knives. Both sides gained access to military-grade weaponry, much of it reportedly sourced from poorly secured military stockpiles in former Soviet bloc countries and Scandinavian military facilities. Hand grenades became common. Automatic weapons appeared regularly. Car bombs became part of the conflict. But the most shocking development involved anti-tank rockets. On April 11, 1996, 2 anti-tank rockets slammed into a Hells Angels compound in Hässleholm, Sweden, causing severe structural damage. Just 6 days later, another major attack occurred. Shortly after midnight on April 17, 1996, an anti-tank missile struck the Danish Hells Angels South Clubhouse in Snoldelev. The blast completely destroyed the building's upper floor. Only hours later, another missile was launched at the headquarters of Avengers MC, a Hells Angels support club located in Nørresundby, Denmark. The missile buried itself deep inside an interior wall, but failed to explode. The war had reached a level few people thought possible. Violence behind prison walls. Even prison offered little protection. On April 26, 1996, attackers breached the perimeter of Horserud State Prison in Denmark. Their target was imprisoned Bandidos Vice President Morten Treben Christiansen. The hit squad threw a hand grenade through his window and followed it with bursts of automatic gunfire directed into his cell. 3 months later, the violence repeated itself. On July 25, 1996, another attack targeted senior Hells Angels member Jørgen Junke Nielsen inside Uterup State Prison. More than 20 rounds from an automatic weapon were fired directly into his prison cell. The war was no longer confined to clubhouses and streets. It had entered the prison system itself. The airport ambushes. Perhaps the most daring operation of the entire conflict took place on March 10, 1996. Intelligence suggested that senior Bandidos members were returning from a meeting in Helsinki. The Hells Angels decided to act. What followed was a coordinated operation involving 2 countries and 2 international airports. At Copenhagen Airport, Hells Angels members exited a vehicle in a crowded parking area and opened fire with automatic weapons on a bus carrying Bandidos members. The attack killed Uffe Lindenskov Larsen, president of the Bandidos Southside chapter. 3 others suffered serious injuries. At almost the same time, another attack unfolded at Oslo Airport in Norway. There, gunmen targeted Norway Bandidos president Lars Harnes, leaving him wounded. The shootings stunned the public. Ordinary travelers suddenly found themselves caught in the middle of a biker war. For governments across Scandinavia, it was a wake-up call. Authorities realized these organizations were willing to carry out military-style attacks in highly public spaces, without regard for civilian safety. The legal consequences followed quickly. After the Copenhagen shooting, 6 Danish Hells Angels members were convicted and received a combined prison sentence of 53 years. Meanwhile, Oslo chapter president Torkjell Rota Alsaker was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his role in the Fornebu airport attack. The Peace Treaty. By the summer of 1997, both organizations had reached a breaking point. Years of war had drained resources, attracted relentless police attention, and weakened both sides. Governments had also introduced new security measures, including specialized prison units designed specifically for biker gang members. The pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Eventually, leaders from both organizations agreed to mediation. The man selected to oversee the negotiations was prominent Danish defense attorney Thorkild Høyer. After months of discussions, a historic breakthrough occurred. On September 25, 1997, Bent Svan Nielsen, representing the Hells Angels, and Jim Tindon, the international president of the Bandidos, appeared together at a highly publicized press conference in Denmark. There, they signed a formal peace agreement. The treaty established a territorial balance. Both organizations agreed to respect designated areas of influence and avoid direct conflict over specific criminal operations. Speaking to the media, Nielsen famously declared, "We cannot give guarantees that there will be no more incidents, but we can actively intervene and ensure that those who defy the cooperation agreement are excluded from our biker culture." The agreement worked, at least for a while. The rocket attacks stopped. The coordinated assassinations largely ended. The open warfare faded, but the rivalry never truly disappeared. In 2011, the peace treaty was officially declared dead. Although the large-scale battles of the 1990s did not return, both organizations gradually shifted back into localized and covert proxy conflicts. The collapse of the agreement highlighted a reality that had defined biker wars for decades. When two organizations claim absolute control over territory, lasting peace is often far harder to maintain than war itself. Operation Black Biscuit, the undercover mission that reached the Hells Angels' inner circle. By the early 2000s, American law enforcement had realized that traditional policing wasn't enough to penetrate outlaw motorcycle clubs. Raids and arrests could disrupt operations, but they rarely exposed what was happening inside the organization itself. Federal agencies began shifting toward a different strategy: long-term undercover infiltration. One of the most ambitious efforts ever launched against the Hells Angels was Operation Black Biscuit, an ATF operation that began in 2001. The investigation gained urgency after the violent events of April 26, 2002, during the Laughlin River Run in Nevada. Inside Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, a deadly confrontation erupted between the Hells Angels and their longtime rivals, the Mongols. Guns, knives, and fists were used as the fight unfolded in front of hundreds of shocked civilians. When the violence ended, 3 bikers were dead. Federal authorities wanted answers. To get them, they turned to Special Agent J. Dobbins. Becoming J. Bird Davis Dobbins adopted a completely new identity. Undercover, he became J. Bird Davis, a rough debt collector, gun runner, and contract killer who appeared perfectly suited for the outlaw biker world. Physically, he fit the role. Standing 6 feet 1 inch tall, heavily built, covered in tattoos, and wearing a thick beard, Dobbins looked the part. Some of the tattoos used to strengthen his cover story were even applied by a Hells Angels member. For nearly 2 years, he lived a double life. Every detail had to be believable. To explain why his children rarely appeared around him, he created an elaborate story about a failed marriage and divorce. During one unexpected encounter with Robert McKay, president of the Hells Angels Tucson chapter, Dobbins' daughter even played along, helping maintain the illusion that her father truly was an outlaw biker. The deception became increasingly complex. On March 11, 2003, Dobbins staged a debt collection operation designed to impress club members. He invited McKay to accompany him to a Waffle House in Tucson. There, an undercover ATF agent posing as a debtor was confronted and threatened by Dobbins. The encounter ended with a check for $17,000 changing hands, while McKay received a $200 share. To the Hells Angels, it appeared that Dobbins had collected a debt through intimidation and fear. The performance worked. Members of the Tucson chapter began encouraging him to participate in additional operations. Mackay was reportedly so impressed that he suggested using an electric cattle prod to torture future debtors. Dobyns was getting closer than any undercover operative had ever gone before. The moment his cover nearly collapsed. Despite his success, the mission eventually reached a dangerous turning point. By 2003, tensions between the Hells Angels and the Mongols in Arizona had intensified dramatically. The violence was escalating, and local Hells Angels leaders wanted proof that Dobyns was truly committed. Words were no longer enough. They wanted blood. According to investigative accounts, the situation became even more volatile after a series of brutal crimes connected to club members, including a case in which a woman was allegedly beaten to death inside the Mesa clubhouse, decapitated in the desert, and wrapped in carpet. Against that backdrop, the president of the Skull Valley chapter allegedly gave Dobyns a direct order. He was told to kill a member of the Mongols. Dobyns immediately understood the danger. Refusing the order would almost certainly expose him as an informant. If that happened, he believed torture and execution would follow. The ATF needed a solution, and they needed one fast. The fake murder that saved the operation. To keep the operation alive, investigators devised one of the most elaborate undercover deceptions in ATF history. Instead of carrying out a real killing, they staged a homicide. The details of the operation convinced Hells Angels members that a rival Mongol had been executed. As part of the ruse, Dobyns presented a blood-covered vest to senior members of the Tucson Hells Angels, including the chapter president and sergeant-at-arms. The reaction was immediate. Believing Dobyns had carried out the murder, club leaders celebrated him. According to accounts of the operation, members hugged him, kissed him, and welcomed him as one of their own. They then drove into the desert and burned the bloody vest to destroy what they believed was evidence of the crime. The deception had worked perfectly. Dobyns had crossed the final barrier. He was granted full patch status within the Skull Valley chapter, becoming the first law enforcement officer known to successfully penetrate the Hells Angels inner circle at that level. The cost of going undercover, but reaching the top, came at a price. The emotional strain on the undercover team had become overwhelming. Agents were living separate lives, isolated from their families, constantly fearing discovery. A TF leadership eventually decided the risks had become too great. Operation Black Biscuit was shut down, and Dobyns was pulled from the field. The investigation produced 36 federal indictments. Yet the courtroom results were disappointing. Many of the cases collapsed after federal prosecutors accused the ATF of failing to disclose important information obtained through paid informants. For Dobyns, the problems didn't end there. Death threats followed. Then, in 2008, his Tucson home was destroyed in a targeted firebombing. Shockingly, the ATF later investigated Dobyns himself as a possible suspect in the attack. The accusation deeply damaged his relationship with the agency. Years of legal battles followed as Dobyns sued the government for failing to protect him and his family after one of the most dangerous undercover operations in modern law enforcement history. Although he was eventually cleared of any involvement in the arson, the collapse of many Black Biscuit prosecutions highlighted just how difficult it is to dismantle deeply entrenched outlaw motorcycle organizations through undercover operations alone. William Queen and life inside the Mongols. While Jay Dobyns was working his way into the Hells Angels, another ATF agent was carrying out a similarly dangerous mission inside their most bitter rivals. His name was William Queen. In 1998, Queen entered the Mongols under the alias Billy St. John. For the next 28 months, he immersed himself in a volatile world fueled by methamphetamine, violence, and constant criminal activity. His cover was remarkably successful, Queen didn't simply gain access. He became a member. Eventually, he earned a patch and rose to the position of chapter treasurer. That role gave him access to financial records, membership information, and evidence connected to weapons trafficking and narcotics distribution. From an investigative standpoint, the operation was a major success. Personally, it came at a heavy cost. When the undercover identity becomes real. As months turned into years, Queen began experiencing the same psychological conflict faced by many deep-cover operatives. The lines between his real identity and his undercover identity started to blur. He spent more time with the Mongols than with his own family. The men he was secretly investigating became the people he saw every day, the people he laughed with, the people who trusted him. One moment stayed with him forever. When Queen's mother died, not a single ATF employee reached out to offer condolences, but members of the Mongols did. According to Queen, dozens of them hugged him, mourned with him, and expressed genuine affection. The experience created a painful contradiction. The very people he was helping send to prison were showing him loyalty and emotional support that he felt was missing from his professional life. Later, in his memoir Under and Alone, Queen reflected on this emotional conflict. The book revealed how deeply the assignment affected him psychologically. The Mongols loved Billy St. John, but if they had ever discovered that Billy St. John was actually William Queen, he believed they would have tortured and killed him without hesitation. Why Rico has struggled against the Hells Angels. For decades, the U.S. government's most powerful weapon against organized crime has been the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO. Passed in 1970, the law was designed to target criminal organizations by linking individual crimes to a larger enterprise. Rather than prosecuting isolated offenders, prosecutors could pursue entire leadership structures. The federal government first tried applying RICO to the Hells Angels in 1979. The case targeted Sonny Barger and leaders from the Oakland chapter. Prosecutors argued that the Hells Angels existed primarily as a criminal enterprise focused on illegal drugs and firearms. The strategy failed. The jury acquitted Barger and several co-defendants on the central RICO allegations. The defense argued that crimes committed by individual members did not automatically represent official club policy. Barger emphasized a key weakness in the government's case. Investigators could not produce written orders, meeting records, or official documents directly connecting the organization's leadership structure to criminal activity. That outcome established a legal model that would benefit the club for decades. Because Hells Angels chapters operate with significant independence, and because the club presents itself through bylaws that resemble those of a social organization, prosecutors often struggle to prove the unified criminal intent required for major RICO convictions. The same problem surfaced after Operation Black Biscuit. Many high-profile racketeering charges against 16 senior Arizona members were eventually reduced, dismissed, or resolved through lesser plea agreements. Despite years of investigation, the club's overall structure remained intact. The digital age and the cryptophone trap. As law enforcement became more advanced, biker organizations adapted. Traditional face-to-face communication increasingly gave way to encrypted technology. Throughout the 2000s and 10s, many figures within the global criminal underworld began relying on specialized encrypted devices known as cryptophones. Services such as EncroChat, SkyECC, and Anom became especially popular. These devices were expensive, often costing hundreds of dollars each month. Many had cameras, microphones, GPS systems, and USB ports physically removed to reduce surveillance risks. Their users believed they were completely secure. That confidence turned out to be a mistake. Between 2019 and 2021, European law enforcement agencies led by investigators from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands successfully penetrated the networks behind EncroChat and Sky ECC. By gaining access to encryption systems and server infrastructure located in Roubaix, France, authorities were able to secretly monitor enormous amounts of communication. More than 1 billion messages from over 160,000 accounts were intercepted. What investigators found was staggering. Believing their conversations were private, users openly discussed drug shipments, financial transactions, weapons deals, torture, and murder. Some exchanged photographs documenting criminal activity. Others shared detailed operational plans. In one decrypted conversation, associates connected to the Hells Angels discussed a planned killing in chilling language. Shoot in the head a lot to make example. We gotta erase his head from his torso. The information gathered through these platforms triggered thousands of arrests around the world. Authorities seized large quantities of weapons, disrupted major cocaine trafficking networks, and exposed criminal operations spanning multiple countries. Ironically, the technology that many believed would make them invisible ended up becoming one of law enforcement's most powerful investigative tools. For organizations built on trust, secrecy, and personal loyalty, the digital age had introduced a new vulnerability, one that no clubhouse wall could keep out. The public image strategy, charity, community events, and the toy runs. One of the most effective weapons in the Hells Angels arsenal isn't a motorcycle, a clubhouse, or even a criminal network. It's public perception. For decades, the club has understood something many criminal organizations never fully grasped. Image matters. While federal agencies and organized crime investigators have repeatedly described the Hells Angels as a criminal enterprise, the club has spent years building an entirely different image in the public eye. To achieve that, they have relied on experienced attorneys, media-savvy representatives, and carefully planned public relations efforts designed to present the organization as a brotherhood devoted to community service and charity. At the center of this strategy is an event that has become closely associated with the club, the annual Toy Run. Every winter, thousands of Hells Angels members and supporters participate in large motorcycle rides that collect toys, money, and donations for disadvantaged children, special needs schools, and local charitable organizations. These events generate positive headlines and often attract significant public attention. One of the most talked about examples occurred in 2013. The Fresno chapter gained widespread media coverage after members reportedly waited outside a local Walmart for 5 straight days. When the store opened, they purchased every bicycle available and later donated them to a children's charity. Stories like these helped create a very different image from the one typically presented in criminal investigations. But critics see a different motive behind these charitable acts. Many criminologists and federal investigators argue that these highly publicized events serve a strategic purpose beyond generosity. They believe the charity work functions as a carefully crafted shield, building influence beyond the clubhouse. Every positive news story creates goodwill. Every charity event strengthens local relationships. And every photograph featuring Hells Angels members standing alongside politicians, athletes, business leaders, or celebrities adds another layer of legitimacy. Over the years, public figures such as Sylvester Stallone and Hulk Hogan, the Bandidos motorcycle club fused military discipline with outlaw biker culture. Expanding from its Texas mother chapter, this red and gold syndicate grew into a global empire with 100+ members by the 1970s. Its history is defined by extreme violence, the 1972 El Paso Desert executions, the bloody 1984 Milpera massacre in Australia, and Scandinavia's 1990s Great Nordic Biker War, involving anti-tank rockets. Despite the infamous 2015 Waco shootout, resulting in 9 deaths and 177 arrests, the resilient criminal organization continues to adapt globally today. The San Leon Vanguard, Donald Chambers, and the post-Vietnam crucible to understand how the Bandidos Motorcycle Club became one of the most feared biker organizations in America, you have to go back to the turbulent years of the Vietnam War. During the 1960s, thousands of American soldiers were sent to fight in Vietnam. Many of those men returned home carrying scars that could not be seen. They had spent years living alongside brothers in arms, relying on each other to survive. But back in the United States, many veterans struggled to find that same sense of purpose and belonging. For some, civilian life felt empty compared to the intense bonds they had formed in combat. One of those veterans was Donald Eugene Chambers. On March 4, 1966, in the rough fishing community of San Leon, Texas, Chambers set out to build something that would recreate the brotherhood he had lost after leaving the battlefield. A 36-year-old Marine veteran and longshoreman, Chambers spent his days working the demanding docks along the Houston Ship Channel. Within biker circles, he would eventually become known by a nickname that carried enormous respect: Mother. After returning from Vietnam, Chambers spent time around several motorcycle clubs, but none of them lived up to what he was looking for. In his eyes, they lacked discipline, structure, and commitment. He wanted something stronger, a club built around loyalty, respect, and absolute dedication to the group. His vision was simple: combine the freedom of motorcycle culture with the discipline of the United States Marine Corps. The name that would eventually become famous came from an unexpected moment during a trip to Mexico. In 1965, Chambers and a few close friends traveled to Sonora to attend a series of bullfights. On the way back, they stopped at a cantina. Covered in dust from the road, the Americans stood out immediately. Curious about the group, a customer asked a waitress who they were. The waitress reportedly answered, "That's DC and his American Bandidos." The name stuck. Chambers was drawn to the image of the Mexican bandit, an outlaw who lived by his own code, rejected outside authority, and defended his territory at all costs. The idea perfectly matched the type of club he wanted to build. Back in Texas, Chambers officially founded the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. Recruitment began in biker bars and blue-collar communities throughout Houston, Galveston, Corpus Christi, and San Antonio. The club quickly attracted men who felt disconnected from mainstream society. Many of them veterans looking for the same brotherhood Chambers had been searching for. The early members were a colorful and unconventional group. Long beards, wild hair, military tattoos, and rebellious personalities became part of the club's identity. Most members were known by road names rather than their real names. There was Pecker, Revolver, Deadweight, and Log Cabin. The last earned his nickname for a simple reason: he refused to drink whiskey from a normal glass and instead carried it in a log cabin syrup bottle wherever he went. Despite the rough appearance of the membership, Chambers enforced a surprising level of discipline. Drawing heavily from his Marine Corps background, he established rules, expectations, and a chain of command. He even selected red and gold as the club's official colors because they reflected the colors associated with the Marine Corps. The original Houston chapter became known as the Mother Chapter, a direct reflection of Chambers' influence. Before long, additional chapters were established in Southwest Houston and Corpus Christi, marking the beginning of the club's expansion across Texas. By the early 1970s, the Bandidos had grown rapidly. Membership had surpassed 100 riders, and the organization was changing. What had started as a motorcycle brotherhood was increasingly becoming involved in criminal activity. As the club expanded, so did its reputation for violence. Chambers demanded complete control over territory along the Texas Gulf Coast. That determination brought the Bandidos into regular conflict with rival groups and law enforcement agencies. In 1969, Chambers demonstrated just how seriously he took internal discipline. A Bandidos member wanted for an unrelated murder was kidnapped and assaulted by fellow club members before being forced to surrender to authorities. The message was clear: if someone threatened the club's interests, the organization would handle the problem itself. Violence continued to follow the club. At one point, Chambers attended what was supposed to be a peace meeting with a rival gang at a Houston bar in the East End. Instead, the meeting erupted into a chaotic gunfight. Afterward, Chambers temporarily shifted his operations to New Mexico as tensions continued to rise. But the most infamous event of his presidency was still to come. On December 22, 1972, a dispute over drugs led to one of the darkest crimes in Bandidos history. Earlier that day, two brothers, Marley Leon Tarver and Preston LeRae Tarver, sold a quantity of white powder to local Bandidos members, claiming it was high-quality methamphetamine. When the substance was tested, the bikers discovered they had been deceived. The powder was nothing more than baking soda. For Chambers, that deception demanded punishment. Along with fellow Bandidos Jesse Fain Injundil and Crazy Ray Vincente, Chambers tracked down the brothers and abducted them at gunpoint. The Tarvers were driven deep into the cold desert outside El Paso. Under the harsh glow of vehicle headlights, they were ordered to dig their own graves in the frozen ground. Once the holes were finished, Chambers and his accomplices executed both men with shotguns. Their bodies were then burned and buried in the desert. What the killers did not realize was that someone was watching. A Bandidos prospect named Robert Munnerlyn had secretly been working as a police informant. Having gained access to the club's inner circle, he witnessed the crime and later provided investigators with detailed testimony. His account proved devastating. The evidence led to murder convictions for Chambers, Deal, and Vincente. All three men received life sentences. With the club's founder now behind bars, the Bandidos needed new leadership. The membership elected Ronald Jerome Hodge as national president. Like Chambers, Hodge was a former Marine. Within the club, he carried the nickname Mr. Prospect because he had earned his full membership colors in just a single month, an achievement considered almost unheard. After becoming president, he adopted the road name Stepmother, a respectful tribute to Chambers and his legendary nickname, Mother. Although Chambers would eventually be released on parole in 1983, his time leading the Bandidos was over. He stepped away from club life entirely and spent his remaining years living quietly in El Paso. On July 18, 1999, Donald Eugene Chambers died from cancer. He was buried in Houston's Forest Park Lawndale Cemetery, beneath a large stone marker that reflected the life he had lived. Carved into the monument were references to his Marine Corps service, his role within the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, and a phrase that perfectly captured the outlaw identity he helped create: "We are the people our parents warned us about." The anatomy of the vest, colors, code, and the language of patches inside the outlaw biker world, a vest is far more than a piece of clothing. For members of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, the vest, commonly called colors or a cut, represents identity, loyalty, status, and commitment. Every patch sewn onto it tells a story. To outsiders, it may look like leather covered in artwork. To bikers, it serves as a badge of honor, a rank insignia, and a warning all at once. The most recognizable symbol worn by the Bandidos is the famous Fat Mexican. The logo depicts a cartoon-style Mexican revolutionary wearing a large sombrero while carrying a machete in one hand and a revolver in the other. Over the years, it has become one of the most recognizable outlaw biker symbols in the world. According to official club lore, founder Donald Chambers based both the name and logo on the Frito Bandito, the cartoon mascot once used by Frito's corn chips. But there is one major problem with that story. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club was founded in 1966. The Frito Bandito character did not appear until 1967. That means the mascot was created a year after the club already existed. Despite the obvious contradiction, The story has continued to be repeated within biker circles for decades. Whether fact or legend, it demonstrates how powerful myths can become inside tightly connected subcultures. Sometimes the story becomes more important than the timeline. The Bandidos backpatch follows a strict three-piece design that is recognized throughout the biker world. At the top sits the top rocker, a curved patch displaying the club name, Bandidos. Directly beneath it is the center patch featuring the fat Mexican logo. At the bottom is the bottom rocker, identifying the chapter's territory. Depending on where a member belongs, it might read Texas, Australia, Europe, or another region under Bandidos' control. The colors are impossible to miss. Bright red lettering stitched onto a gold background has become the club's trademark appearance. Those colors are guarded aggressively. Full members are the only people allowed to wear the fat Mexican patch. Supporters and associates may wear approved merchandise using the red and gold color scheme, but the club's main insignia remains off-limits. Earning the right to wear those colors is neither quick nor easy. The Bandidos follow a structured initiation process designed to test loyalty, discipline, and commitment. The journey begins as a hang-around. At this stage, the individual is allowed to attend public events and spend time around the club. He may wash motorcycles, run errands, help with club functions, and perform basic tasks while members evaluate whether he is a good fit. If approved, he moves up to the rank of prospect. This is where the real test begins. A prospect lives at the bottom of the club hierarchy, sponsored by a full patch member. He is expected to obey orders without hesitation. Day or night, he can be called upon to complete tasks assigned by senior members. His commitment is constantly examined. Prospects are not allowed to wear the club's most important symbol. Instead of the complete patch set, they wear only the top and bottom rockers. The absence of the center patch serves as a visible reminder that they have not yet earned full membership. The final stage is probation. This is where a prospect's loyalty faces its toughest challenge. Every action is watched. Every decision is judged. To become a full member, the candidate must receive unanimous approval from the active chapter membership through a secret ballot vote. One objection can end the process. For those who make it through, membership comes with serious obligations. New members are required to sign ownership of their Harley-Davidson motorcycle over to the club. The motorcycle must be American-made and kept in excellent condition at all times. A rider whose bike constantly breaks down risks fines and disciplinary action. Repeated failures can result in the club taking both the motorcycle and the members' colors. Enforcement of these rules typically falls to the chapter's sergeant-at-arms. Daily life inside the Bandidos is governed by strict bylaws. Members are required to attend meetings known as church 4 times every month. These gatherings are not casual social events. They follow formal procedures where club business is discussed, disputes are settled, finances are handled, and plans are organized. Legal defense funds are also maintained through member dues collected during these meetings. Above everything else, the club promotes one central belief: all members are your brothers and your family. That idea sits at the core of the Bandidos identity. The bond is reinforced through smaller patches worn on the front of the vest. These patches reflect a member's rank, achievements, and standing within the organization, creating a visible record of his place inside the club. The Father's Day slaughter, the Milpera massacre, and the Australian schism as the Bandidos expanded beyond the United States during the early 1980s. They entered new territories looking for growth. Under the leadership of Ronald's stepmother Hodge, the club aggressively pursued international expansion. But their arrival in Australia would trigger one of the bloodiest biker wars ever seen. At the time, Australia's outlaw motorcycle scene was dominated by the Comanchero Motorcycle Club. The organization was led by William George Jock Ross, a Scottish immigrant who ruled with military-style discipline and referred to himself as the club's supreme commander. Ross expected complete obedience. Members participated in weekly training sessions that included combat exercises, physical conditioning, and martial arts drills. He even established a specialized enforcement group known as the Strike Force. While some respected Ross's leadership style, many younger members grew tired of his rigid control. Among the most vocal critics was Colin Caesar Campbell. Campbell served as the Comancheros' national sergeant-at-arms and had a fearsome reputation as a street fighter. He reportedly claimed to have participated in more than 800 fights since the age of 14. To Campbell, Ross's military drills were unnecessary and self-important. Tension between the two sides continued to build. Everything finally exploded during a clubhouse meeting in July 1983. According to reports, Campbell and several other members discovered Ross involved with the wife of another active Comanchero member. The incident was particularly damaging because Ross himself had enforced strict rules against members pursuing each other's partners. Campbell attempted to organize an internal hearing that would remove Ross from power. Ross simply refused to attend. Instead, he announced a dramatic solution. The Comancheros would split into two factions. His loyal supporters would relocate to Western Sydney, while the opposing group would remain under the leadership of Anthony Snodgrass Spencer. The split created immediate uncertainty. Fearing retaliation from Ross, Spencer and Charles "Charlie" Sabaris traveled to the United States seeking support. There they met with Bandidos president Ronnie Hodge. For the Americans, the opportunity was attractive. At the time, phenyl 2-propanone, commonly known as P2P, remained legal in Australia, but was heavily restricted in the United States. Because the chemical was a key ingredient in methamphetamine production, American Bandidos leaders recognized the potential value of an Australian alliance. In November 1983, Hodge formally approved the rebel faction's transition into the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. The process, known in biker culture as patching over, transformed the former Comancheros into Australia's first Bandidos chapter. Anthony Spencer became national president. Caesar Campbell became national sergeant-at-arms. To mark the change, the new Bandidos publicly burned their old Comanchero colors. In the outlaw biker world, few acts are considered more disrespectful. Jock Ross took it personally. His anger became focused almost entirely on Caesar Campbell, whom he viewed as the driving force behind the rebellion. Anti-Campbell shirts appeared among Ross's supporters. Targets featuring Campbell's face were displayed inside the new Comanchero clubhouse, alongside threatening messages. The stage was set for violence. That violence arrived on Father's Day, September 2, 1984. A motorcycle swap meet had been organized at the Viking Tavern in Milpera, a suburb of Sydney. Both clubs were expected to attend. Knowing confrontation was likely, Spencer instructed his members to arrive armed with shotguns, rifles, pipes, and baseball bats. He reportedly declared, "We'll go anywhere to show the other clubs we're not scared. If the Comancheros are there, we'll go ahead as planned. We'll show our colors and bash them." At around 1:00 p.m., 19 armed Comancheros arrived and positioned themselves around the venue. Jock Ross coordinated his men using walkie-talkies and planned an ambush based on a military pincer movement. But when the Bandidos failed to arrive on time, several Comancheros relaxed and entered the tavern. 20 minutes later, everything changed. 34 Bandidos rolled into the parking lot. The Comancheros were caught completely off guard. Caesar Campbell led his men forward in formation toward Comanchero Sergeant at arms Philip Leroy Jeschke. Meanwhile, Spencer stayed inside the passenger seat of a parked vehicle. The confrontation escalated quickly. Comanchero Ivan Spara-Romchek stepped forward and pressed a loaded shotgun directly against Campbell's chest. The two exchanged words. Campbell challenged him to put the gun down and settle the dispute with fists. Then a single shot rang out. Jeschke accidentally discharged his shotgun into the air. That shot became the spark that ignited the massacre. Within seconds, The parking lot turned into a war zone. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Metal pipes swung through the air. Men screamed, fought, and fell across the asphalt. The battle would leave multiple people dead, dozens wounded, and permanently change the history of outlaw motorcycle clubs in Australia. When the shooting finally ended, 7 people had lost their lives, and 28 others had been seriously injured. The legal aftermath was enormous. The trial that followed became the largest in New South Wales history. Numerous bikers received lengthy prison sentences, including Jock Ross, who was sentenced to life imprisonment. The emotional toll proved devastating. For Anthony Spencer, the pressure became unbearable. While awaiting the outcome of the case, the Bandidos leader took his own life inside Parklea Prison on April 28, 1985. The Milpera Massacre became one of the most infamous events in outlaw biker history and cemented the Australian Bandidos as a major force within the global organization. Rockets and Red Lines, the great Nordic biker war of Scandinavia by the late 1980s, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club had already established itself as a growing force in the United States. But club leaders had bigger ambitions. They wanted a foothold in Europe, and on September 20, 1989, that process officially began when the Bandidos opened a chapter in Marseille, France. From there, the club steadily expanded north. Their ultimate target was Scandinavia, a region with profitable drug markets and a biker scene that had long been controlled by one organization, the Hells Angels. Since 1980, the Hells Angels had dominated the Nordic biker world. Their influence stretched across Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and they expected smaller clubs to either submit or disappear. Throughout the early 1990s, independent biker clubs across Scandinavia found themselves under increasing pressure. Many believed they were being forced into the Hells Angels' sphere of influence, leaving little room for clubs that wanted to remain independent. Some decided to fight back. Rather than stand alone, several Danish and Swedish clubs began looking for a powerful ally. They found one in the Bandidos. On December 17, 1993, Denmark's Undertaker's MC officially became the first Scandinavian chapter of the Bandidos through a process known as patching over. To the Hells Angels, this wasn't simply a business decision. It was a direct challenge to their authority. What followed would become one of the most violent biker conflicts ever recorded. Known as the Great Nordic Biker War, the conflict lasted from 1994 until 1997 and transformed parts of Scandinavia into battlegrounds. This wasn't the kind of biker war most people imagine. It wasn't limited to bar fights, fists, chains, or pistols. The violence escalated to a level that shocked governments, police agencies, and ordinary citizens alike. Both sides gained access to military-grade weapons, many reportedly stolen from military stockpiles in Sweden and Denmark. Rocket launchers appeared, hand grenades were used, car bombs exploded, machine guns opened fire. Landmines and military explosives became part of a conflict unfolding in countries known more for stability and safety than organized violence. Entire neighborhoods suddenly found themselves caught in the middle of a biker war that looked more like a military campaign. The most infamous attack of the entire conflict happened on October 6, 1996. That night, a Hells Angels chapter in Copenhagen was hosting a Viking-themed party at its heavily fortified clubhouse. More than 100 people were gathered inside. Members, prospects, friends, and even local residents filled the building. What happened next stunned Europe. Under the cover of darkness, a Bandidos attack team moved into position on the roof of a nearby building. Their weapon wasn't a rifle. It wasn't even a machine gun. It was a stolen Swedish AT-4 anti-tank rocket launcher. The attackers aimed directly at the clubhouse. Moments later, the rocket was fired. The missile smashed through the building's concrete walls before detonating inside. The explosion tore through the crowded hall. Hells Angels prospect Louis Linde Nielsen was killed. A local resident, 31-year-old Janne Krohn, also lost her life after attending the party as a guest. 19 other people suffered serious injuries from flying shrapnel. The attack sent shockwaves across Scandinavia. Citizens struggled to understand how outlaw motorcycle clubs had escalated their feud to the point where anti-tank rockets were being fired into civilian neighborhoods. Political leaders faced enormous pressure to act. In response, the governments of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway introduced emergency measures designed to restrict the activities and public gatherings of outlaw biker organizations. By September 1997, both sides were exhausted. Years of violence had attracted intense scrutiny from police and intelligence agencies across Europe. Under growing pressure, representatives of the Bandidos and Hells Angels eventually agreed to a televised peace settlement. When the dust finally settled, the numbers were staggering. 11 people had been killed. 74 attempted murders had been recorded. 96 people had been wounded. The Great Nordic Biker War remains one of the most extraordinary criminal conflicts in modern European history, a war fought not by armies, but by rival motorcycle clubs willing to use military weapons to defend territory and influence. The Texas Powder Keg, Waco, Twin Peaks, and the collateral fiasco of justice for decades, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club considered Texas its undisputed homeland. The club had been built there. Its power had grown there. And according to Bandidos tradition, Texas belonged to them. That belief would eventually help spark one of the most notorious biker confrontations in modern American history. On May 17, 2015, violence erupted at a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas. What followed became the deadliest biker shootout ever witnessed in the United States, but the bloodshed itself was only half the story. The legal disaster that followed would drag on for 4 years and end with a shocking outcome: not a single criminal conviction. To understand how it happened, you have to look at the growing tension that had been building for years. The conflict centered on territory. Since the club's founding in 1966, the Bandidos had enforced a long-standing rule throughout Texas. No motorcycle club was allowed to wear the Texas bottom rocker on its vest without Bandidos' approval and the payment of dues. Most clubs accepted the arrangement. The Cossacks Motorcycle Club did not. As the Cossacks began openly wearing the Texas rocker without permission, tensions escalated rapidly. What started as symbolic defiance soon became physical confrontation. Throughout 2013 and 2014, fights broke out across the state. One of the most notable incidents occurred during a Toys for Tots charity event in Decatur, where a violent clash drew attention from law enforcement agencies. Reports of assaults and targeted attacks involving members of both clubs continued to surface. Authorities became increasingly concerned. The Texas Department of Public Safety eventually issued a warning to local law enforcement agencies, stating, "The conflict may stem from Cossacks members refusing to pay Bandidos dues for operating in Texas and for claiming Texas as their territory." By the spring of 2015, many believed a major confrontation was only a matter of time. That confrontation arrived in Waco. On May 17, the Texas Confederation of Clubs and Independents, commonly known as Cock and I, held a scheduled gathering at the Twin Peaks restaurant. The organization represented various motorcycle clubs and advocated for riders' rights. The Bandidos played a major role within the coalition. The Cossacks did not. Before the meeting even began, warning signs were already appearing. More than 70 armed Cossacks arrived early and occupied much of the restaurant's outdoor patio area. Police officers and state troopers, anticipating potential violence, quietly positioned themselves around the property in unmarked vehicles. Everyone seemed to know something was coming. No one knew how bad it would become. The situation exploded when a group of Bandidos arrived at the restaurant. Among them was Christopher Jake Carrizal, president of the Dallas chapter. As Carrizal entered the parking lot, tensions immediately flared. According to testimony, a confrontation began after a Bandidos motorcycle either struck or nearly struck a Cossack prospect. Within moments, shouting turned into pushing. pushing turned into fighting, and fighting turned into gunfire. Carizal later testified that someone struck him through his helmet with brass knuckles. He fell to the ground. As bullets began flying around him, he reached for a 2-shot Derringer pistol and fired at an approaching Cossack. The parking lot instantly descended into chaos. Chains swung through the air. Clubs were used as motorcycles toppled over. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. As the battle intensified, police officers stationed nearby opened fire with semi-automatic rifles. Later investigations revealed that at least 4 of the 9 bikers killed during the confrontation had been struck by police gunfire. When everything finally ended, the scene looked like a battlefield. 9 bikers were dead. 20 others suffered serious injuries. The pavement was covered in blood, shattered glass, and shell casings. But what happened after the shooting would become almost as controversial as the violence itself. McLennan County District Attorney Abel Reyna responded with an aggressive legal strategy, unlike anything seen before. Rather than focus on identifying individual suspects, authorities cast an enormous net. Anyone wearing motorcycle club colors became a target. Reyna personally arrived at the scene and ordered widespread arrests. In total, 177 people were taken into custody. Many had never fired a weapon. Some had not participated in the violence at all. Others had simply sought cover when the shooting started. Yet all 177 individuals faced identical charges. Authorities used pre-written, fill-in-the-blank arrest warrants accusing every suspect of participating in organized criminal activity connected to murder. The bond amount was set at an astonishing $1 million per person. Among those arrested was Morgan English. She was not a motorcycle club member. Her connection to the case was that she was married to one. As prosecutors prepared for what they expected would be a landmark case, serious problems began emerging. Those problems would ultimately destroy the entire prosecution. The first issue involved the evidence itself. Investigators collected hundreds of weapons from the scene, including firearms, knives, brass knuckles, chains, and other items. But critical mistakes were made. Many of the weapons were reportedly piled together inside police vehicles without proper evidence handling procedures. Fingerprints were not adequately preserved. Potential DNA evidence became compromised. As a result, prosecutors struggled to prove exactly who possessed or used specific weapons during the fight. The case was already weakening. Then came the trial of Jake Carizal. Prosecutors viewed the Dallas Bandidos leader as their strongest target and hoped his conviction would establish momentum for hundreds of related cases. The trial began in 2017. For weeks, jurors heard testimony from witnesses, officers, and experts. Throughout the proceedings, Carizal maintained the same defense. He claimed he had acted solely to protect himself. After extensive deliberations, the jury failed to reach a unanimous decision. The result was a mistrial. The state's flagship case had collapsed. That collapse triggered a chain reaction. As doubts grew and public scrutiny intensified, a new district attorney, Barry Johnson, took office in 2019. After reviewing the evidence, prosecutors reached a difficult conclusion. There simply was not enough reliable, individualized evidence to continue. One by one, the remaining cases were dismissed. 4 years after the shooting, every criminal charge connected to the mass prosecution had been dropped. The final score stunned observers. 9 dead, hundreds arrested. 4 years of litigation. 0 convictions. The county soon found itself facing major civil rights lawsuits from individuals who argued they had been wrongfully arrested and detained. The Waco shootout remains one of the most controversial law enforcement failures in modern Texas history. For some, it stands as a warning about biker violence. For others, it serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when investigators attempt to prosecute an entire crowd instead of proving the actions of individual suspects. The future of the Red and Gold Syndicate federal investigations have certainly damaged the Bandidos. The 2018 convictions of senior leaders Jeffrey Pike and John Portillo dealt a major blow to the club's leadership structure. But they did not eliminate the organization. Instead, the Bandidos adapted. Rather than relying heavily on centralized leadership, many chapters shifted toward more localized operations. Individual chapters became increasingly responsible for managing their own activities while continuing to maintain loyalty to the larger organization. The club's international structure also provides an important safeguard. Since July 17, 2007, Bandidos chapters in the Western Hemisphere have operated separately from those in Europe and Australia. This separation helps ensure that problems in one region do not automatically threaten the entire global organization. The club has also evolved with changing times. Recruitment methods have modernized. Communication strategies have adapted. Security measures have become more sophisticated. Yet despite those changes, the core identity remains remarkably familiar. The red and gold colors still symbolize rebellion. The fat Mexican patch still carries weight within the outlaw biker world, and the idea of loyalty above everything else continues to attract new generations of members. That may be the greatest reason for the Bandidos' survival. Leaders come and go. Presidents rise and fall. Entire chapters disappear. But the culture remains. And for nearly 6 decades, that culture has allowed the Bandidos Motorcycle Club to endure as one of the most feared and recognizable outlaw biker organizations in the world. This dominant status was shattered on December 5, 1969, when 10 excluded Hispanic riders founded the Mongols Motorcycle Club. What began as racial exclusion escalated into a bloody war over control of the roads and the sacred California bottom rocker patch. Decades of highway ambushes, the infamous 2002 Laughlin Casino riot, and high-stakes ATF infiltrations transformed this territory dispute into America's most brutal biker blood feud. The Asphalt Empire and the birth of a blood feud, the war between the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and the Mongols Motorcycle Club, wasn't sparked overnight. Long before the shootings, stabbings, and highway ambushes made headlines, the tension had already been building deep inside California's outlaw biker scene. At its core, this feud was about power, race, identity, and control over the roads of America. The Hells Angels first appeared on March 17, 1948, in Fontana, California, after several smaller biker clubs decided to merge into one organization. A World War II veteran named Otto Friedli is often credited with creating the club after breaking away from the pissed-off bastards following a violent dispute with another gang. But biker historians still argue over the true beginning. Another version claims the Hells Angels officially started on November 15, 1951, in San Bernardino under Dick White, a member of the Redlands Roadrunners. No matter which story is accurate, the club expanded rapidly during the 1950s and 1960s. Hells Angels charters began spreading across California as members moved from city to city, building new chapters. One of the most powerful became the San Francisco, or Frisco Charter, formed in 1954 by former members of the Market Street Commandos. Then came Sonny Barger, the man who transformed the Oakland Charter into the center of the organization's power. Under Barger's leadership, the Hells Angels became more structured, disciplined, and feared than ever before. They controlled huge parts of California's outlaw biker culture and the criminal economy tied to it. But the club also maintained strict racial barriers. Membership remained almost entirely white, and minority riders found themselves locked out of the outlaw biker world's most powerful organization. By the late 1960s, many Hispanic bikers, including Vietnam veterans returning home from war, wanted a place inside that culture. Many of them were experienced fighters who had survived combat overseas, only to come home and face rejection from the Hells Angels because of their ethnicity. Instead of walking away, they built something of their own. On December 5, 1969, 10 Hispanic riders from East Los Angeles met in Montebello, California, and founded the Mongols Motorcycle Club. The Mongols' first national president, Louis Costello, named the club after Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. Their patch featured a ponytailed warrior riding a motorcycle, designed to represent strength and fearlessness. One of the club's earliest leaders, Alfonso Big Al Acias, had served 3 tours in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne Division. He brought military-style discipline into the club during its early days, helping shape the Mongols into a highly organized brotherhood. Unlike the Hells Angels, the Mongols opened their doors to Hispanic, Native American, Asian, and white riders who felt excluded from the biker world. African American members, however, were still barred from joining. From the beginning, the Mongols existed as a direct challenge to the Hells Angels. In 1974, the Mongols officially voted to become an outlaw motorcycle club. To grow quickly and compete against the far larger Hells Angels organization, they began recruiting heavily from California prisons, especially the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. The strategy worked. Within just a few years, Mongols chapters spread across Los Angeles, Long Beach, Bakersfield, San Diego, the San Gabriel Valley, and the San Fernando Valley. That expansion placed them directly in Hells Angels territory, and California's biker underworld was heading straight toward war. The semiotics of the patch, the California bottom rocker crisis in outlaw biker culture, a member's vest known as a cut or colors, means everything. Every patch tells a story. Every symbol represents loyalty, rank, territory, and identity. To outsiders, it may look like leather and stitching. To biker clubs, it's sacred. The 3-piece patch system became one of the most important symbols in outlaw motorcycle culture. The top rocker displays the club's name. The center patch carries the organization's logo. And the bottom rocker shows the territory the club claims as its own. That bottom rocker would eventually become the reason blood started spilling across California. For decades, the Hells Angels believed they held exclusive rights to wear the California bottom rocker. To them, it symbolized dominance over the state's biker scene. Any other club wearing that patch wasn't just showing pride in California, it was openly challenging Hells Angels' authority. The Mongols refused to remove it. That single act turned tension into open hostility. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the two clubs became locked in a brutal biker war. The Mongols were heavily outnumbered from the start, so they searched for allies among other outlaw clubs that also resisted Hells Angels' expansion. They formed relationships with the Outlaws Motorcycle Club and the Vagos Motorcycle Club, both of whom had their own conflicts with the Hells Angels. The Mongols especially aligned themselves with the Outlaws after Outlaws leader James Big Jim Nolan relocated to Tucson in September 1980, following his parole in Florida. Meanwhile, the Hells Angels strengthened ties with the Dirty Dozen. As alliances formed, the violence became more savage. In August 1972, members of the Glendale Mongols chapter, alongside bikers connected to the San Bernardino Hells Angels, the Straight Satans of Venice, and the Glendale Night Riders, took part in the brutal sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. The following year, in April 1973, Mongols member Furman Benavides was among 11 biker gang members convicted in Los Angeles on charges involving rape and sex crimes. The case exposed how violent and chaotic California's outlaw biker scene had become during that era. Then came murder. On August 15, 1974, Ermelindo Garcia, a member of the Mongols' Visalia chapter, was shot twice and killed during a confrontation outside a bowling alley in Delano. No arrests were ever made. One senior Mongols member publicly criticized the Delano Police Department afterward, claiming the club had already been warned not to retaliate for the killing. But Garcia's funeral revealed something far more important. Nearly 200 Mongols riders joined a mile-long funeral procession through Visalia on August 19, 1974. It was a powerful show of unity and strength. The Mongols were no longer just a small East LA biker club trying to survive. They were becoming a serious force inside California's outlaw underworld. And unlike smaller gangs that folded under pressure, the Mongols proved they could fight back. They were organized, disciplined, and extremely violent when challenged. By the mid-1980s, their resistance had become so fierce that even the Hells Angels were forced to compromise. Eventually, an uneasy peace agreement divided California into two biker territories. The Hells Angels kept control over Northern California, while the Mongols dominated much of Southern California. And in one of the most symbolic victories in outlaw biker history, the Mongols became the only outlaw motorcycle club allowed to wear the California bottom rocker without facing immediate retaliation from the Hells Angels. The Warlord's Gambit, Doc Cavazos, and the Cholo influx by the late 1990s, the Mongols Motorcycle Club was changing fast. The club was still fighting a constant war against the far larger Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, and Mongols leadership understood something dangerous. If they didn't grow quickly, they could eventually get crushed. That pressure led to one of the biggest turning points in the club's history. Under the leadership of Ruben Doc Cavazos, the Mongols launched an aggressive recruitment campaign that completely transformed the organization. Instead of relying only on traditional bikers willing to spend years proving themselves as prospects, Cavazos started pulling members directly from Southern California street gangs. And that decision changed everything. Cavazos specifically targeted Sureo gang members tied to the Mexican Mafia prison network, a criminal system built around loyalty, violence, and the brutal blood-in, blood-out code. The connection between the Mongols and the Mexican Mafia already had roots going back decades. In 1974, Ernest Rabbit Salas served as an officer in the Mongols' San Gabriel chapter, while his brother, Robert Robot Salas, became one of the most feared leaders inside the Mexican Mafia. Those early Mexican Mongols had already proven themselves during violent clashes with the Hells Angels, which convinced club leadership to recruit even more heavily from Hispanic street gangs. By the 1990s, the Mongols had lowered many of the standards that once defined outlaw biker culture. The club began bringing in lowrider Cholo gang veterans from East Los Angeles, many of whom didn't even own motorcycles, and some reportedly didn't know how to ride at all. That directly violated the Mongol constitution, which required members to own Harley-Davidson motorcycles. But at that point, the Mongols weren't only building a motorcycle club anymore. They were building an army. Some of these East LA Vatos Locos became part of a special Mongols enforcement unit that wore black and white Ila enforcer patches on the front of their cuts. They were young, aggressive, street-hardened, and already experienced with gang violence before ever joining the biker world. The new recruits also brought powerful criminal connections with them. As the club expanded, the Mongols became deeply tied to large-scale narcotics operations in Southern California. According to investigators, the club gained direct supply connections to the Tijuana cartel and became heavily involved in cocaine and methamphetamine distribution throughout Los Angeles. One example came in January 2004, when a group of Mongols met members of the Bassett Grande street gang inside a motel room in Arcadia, California, to purchase methamphetamine in bulk for street-level sales. During the meeting, Mongols members reportedly acted as armed security for the transaction, showing how far the club had evolved beyond traditional biker culture. But the transformation came with serious consequences. Inside the club, tensions started boiling between older members who still believed the Mongols should remain a true motorcycle brotherhood, and the younger gang recruits who viewed the organization more like a street army on motorcycles. Many longtime members blamed Cavazos for opening the floodgates to so many Sureo gang members. According to multiple accounts, the internal pressure became so intense that the Mexican Mafia eventually demanded Cavazos' death as part of separate gang-related disputes. Outside the club, the Hells Angels looked at the Mongols with complete disgust. To the Angels, who still valued traditional biker culture, riding history, and old-school outlaw identity, the Mongols had stopped being a legitimate motorcycle club. In their eyes, the Mongols had become a street gang wearing biker patches, and that growing hatred was about to explode into one of the bloodiest biker riots in American history. The night Harris bled, the Laughlin River Run riot of 2002 on April 27, 2002. The long, simmering war between the Hells Angels and the Mongols exploded inside a casino in Laughlin, Nevada. What happened that night would become one of the most violent biker battles ever captured on surveillance cameras. Every year, the Laughlin River Run brought tens of thousands of bikers to the small Nevada resort town, located about 80 miles south of Las Vegas. Despite having a population of only around 8,000 people, Laughlin transformed every April into the largest motorcycle rally in the western United States, attracting nearly 100,000 visitors across 9 casinos. By 2002, tensions between the two clubs were already reaching dangerous levels. The Mongols had expanded aggressively throughout Southern California and now controlled 39 chapters in the region, while the Hells Angels had only 5. The balance of power was shifting, and everybody in the biker world could feel it. On April 25, 2002, Sonny Barger arrived in Laughlin alongside other Hells Angels members, staying at the Flamingo Hilton. The Mongols, meanwhile, were headquartered at Harrah's Laughlin Beach Resort and Casino. Almost immediately, younger Mongols members began provoking the Hells Angels. At one point, a group of Mongols reportedly stormed into the Flamingo Hilton and aggressively stared down the Hells Angels in an attempt to humiliate them publicly. ATF agent John Ciccone later said the Angels tried to stay calm because they were attempting to maintain a cleaner public image at the time, which made the Mongols appear more reckless and dangerous. The situation became even worse because local law enforcement was severely understaffed. Due to budget cuts, only 2 officers were assigned to monitor nearly 100,000 rally attendees, instead of the usual 5 to 7 officers. Detective Tom Allen later admitted their police presence was basically useless. Then, the intimidation escalated further. Around 9:30 p.m. on April 26, a group of Mongols entered the Golden Nugget Casino and surrounded a Hells Angel motorcycle displayed in the lobby, intentionally blocking people from looking at it. Police officers tried to calm things down before violence erupted. One officer even visited the Flamingo Hilton to ask the Hells Angels to show restraint. The response he received made it clear peace wasn't coming. "We have chosen a life of outlaws. We plan to live the life of outlaws. We don't need the police department. We don't care what the fuck you do. We're going to do what we have to do to protect ourselves." A few hours later, at around 2:00 am on April 27th, a group of Hells Angels entered Harrah's Laughlin Casino. According to witnesses, a Mongol intentionally bumped into one of the Angels. Blackjack dealer Jay Burr immediately sensed what was about to happen. He later remembered hearing a Hells Angel say, "We don't want to start this in here. Let's take it outside." Burr instantly called his manager, warning that casino security had absolutely no chance of controlling the situation. Inside Harrah's, Hells Angels members began calling for reinforcements from other Angels staying at the Flamingo Hilton. David Monty Elliott from the Anchorage chapter reportedly said, "What choice do we have?" While another Angel shouted, "Let's mount up." Moments later, dozens of Hells Angels roared into Harrah's parking lot on motorcycles, jumped off their bikes, and stormed into the casino. Led by Raymond Ray Folks, the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Sonoma County chapter, the Angels positioned sentries around the bar area as tensions exploded. At approximately 2:16 am, security cameras captured Folks kicking a Mongol member directly in the chest. That single kick triggered total chaos. Within seconds, nearly 60 to 70 bikers were brawling inside the casino, using guns, knives, hammers, wrenches, and anything else they could grab. Guests and casino workers dove under gambling tables as gunshots echoed through the building. Denise Massey, who had been gambling with her fiancé, later described hearing sudden gunfire and watching bikers shoot at each other while people screamed and ran for cover. During the violence, Hell's Angel Cal Schaefer attacked two Mongols with a ball-peen hammer before pulling a handgun and firing several rounds, shooting Mongol Richard Nolan. Another Hell's Angel, Rodney Cox, chased down an approaching Mongol while armed with a crescent wrench and reportedly smashed it into the man's head. James Hannigan and Henry Leadham forced Mongol leader Roger Pinney onto his knees. Leadham punched him repeatedly while Hannigan grabbed his hair and stabbed him twice in the chest. The violence only escalated from there. Hannigan later stabbed Mongol Benjamin Leyva in the shoulder. As Leyva stumbled away wounded, Cal Schaefer allegedly shot him multiple times in the elbow, back, and stomach. Enrique Muoz staggered through the casino bleeding from a gunshot wound to the chest. Davy Camargo had been shot in the leg. Anthony Salvador Barrera suffered stab wounds to the chest. Blood trails stretched across nearly every casino exit. Eventually, the Mongols fled the building. Many reportedly hid their biker cuts inside garbage cans and air vents to avoid being identified by police. Investigators later noted that not a single Hell's Angel removed his colors. When the violence finally ended, 3 bikers were dead. Anthony Barrera of the Mongols had been stabbed to death. Hell's Angels members Jeremy Bell and Robert Tumulty had both been shot and killed. Officer Gary Hood was the first policeman to arrive at the scene and immediately called for backup. Officer Michael Ford entered the chaos with his weapon drawn and forced Hell's Angel James Hannigan to surrender at gunpoint. When police secured the casino floor, they discovered what looked more like a battlefield than a biker rally. Investigators recovered 14 guns, 107 knives, 2 hammers, 2 wrenches, and 9 heavy flashlights abandoned throughout the casino. But even after the riot ended, the war between the clubs continued. During a West Coast officers' meeting on May 18, 2002, Robert Bad Bob Johnson, president of the Mesa Hells Angels chapter, reportedly suggested leaking copies of the surveillance footage so the public could witness what he called the honor and integrity of the Hells Angels for standing their ground during the riot. The legal battle afterward became a disaster of its own. Nevada state prosecutors wanted to charge the bikers as individuals, while federal prosecutors pushed to indict the clubs as criminal organizations under the Vicar, Act the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering law. The disagreement slowed the investigation for months. Eventually, the case was handed over to ATF agent John Ciccone. Then, on December 2, 2003, United States Attorney Daniel G. Bogdan announced that a federal grand jury had issued an 11-count indictment against 42 Hells Angels members. Each was charged with 10 counts related to violence in aid of racketeering, along with 1 firearms charge connected to crimes of violence. Public warfare, from Norco to Chuck E. Cheese, the riot at Laughlin, changed everything. Whatever invisible line once existed between the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and the Mongols Motorcycle Club was completely gone after 2002. The old territorial understandings had collapsed, and the war between the two clubs became more reckless, more public, and far more dangerous for ordinary people caught nearby. The violence was no longer limited to highways, biker bars, or isolated clubhouses. Now it was happening in places filled with families and children. One of the clearest examples came in December 2005 during a Toys for Tots charity ride in Norco, California. For years, the annual event had been considered neutral ground where rival motorcycle clubs could gather to collect Christmas gifts for underprivileged kids without starting trouble. But that peace didn't last long. When a large group of Mongols arrived at the event already packed with Hells Angels members, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Within moments, the charity gathering exploded into a violent street fight. Witnesses described bikers attacking each other with steel pipes, brass knuckles, and heavy boots, while families and volunteers watched in shock nearby. The fight unfolded in full public view, completely destroying the idea that biker clubs still followed any unwritten rules about keeping violence away from children or charity events. That older code was disappearing fast. And the conflict only became more brazen from there. In 2007, the feud reached one of its most disturbing moments inside a family-friendly Chuck E. Cheese restaurant in San Diego. Two Mongols members known by the nicknames Monster and Monk were inside the restaurant when they spotted a rival Hell's Angel. Families were eating pizza. Children were playing games. None of that mattered. According to investigators, the Mongols immediately launched an attack right there inside the restaurant. The indictment later claimed the main goal wasn't simply revenge, it was to steal the Hells Angels biker jacket and patches. In outlaw biker culture, taking a rival's colors is considered a massive humiliation and a symbol of dominance. And in that moment, the Mongols cared more about capturing those patches than the panic happening around terrified families and children. The war had become completely public. Then, in December 2008, violence exploded again, this time in Las Vegas. On December 20, a group of 13 Hells Angels members attended a wedding ceremony at a special memory wedding chapel near 4th Street and Gas Avenue. After the ceremony ended, at least 3 Mongols members arrived at the same chapel for a completely unrelated wedding. The moment both sides saw each other, the situation erupted. According to investigators, the Hells Angels immediately swarmed the 3 Mongols. Witnesses said the attack was brutal and fast. The Mongols were beaten with fists, boots, bottles, and even metal trash cans. By the time police arrived, all 3 victims had suffered serious stab wounds and blunt force injuries. The entire assault was captured on the chapel's security cam. Defense attorneys later argued that the Hells Angels acted out of retaliation because Mongols members had allegedly attacked and killed a Hells Angel months earlier in San Francisco. But prosecutors pushed the case aggressively. In total, 13 men faced charges connected to the attack. One of the most important developments came when Hells Angel member Jeffrey Murray accepted a plea deal for battery causing substantial bodily harm tied to criminal gang activity. That plea agreement became historic in Nevada because it marked the first time a Hells Angel formally accepted a gang enhancement penalty, a legal addition that increased prison time because the crime was connected to organized gang activity. For law enforcement, it was proof they were finally finding new ways to target outlaw biker organizations. But behind the scenes, federal agents were already preparing something much bigger. The infiltrators, behind the black and white vests. By the late 1990s, federal authorities realized traditional policing wasn't working against the Mongols. The club operated through loyalty, secrecy, and strict internal hierarchy. Informants rarely survived long, and witnesses were often too terrified to cooperate. Investigators understood that if they wanted to dismantle the Mongols from the inside, they needed someone willing to become part of the Brotherhood itself. That's when the ATF launched one of the boldest undercover operations in American law enforcement history. In 1998, veteran federal agent William Queen was chosen to infiltrate the Mongols' San Fernando Valley chapter. Queen wasn't just another undercover cop. He was a Vietnam veteran and former U.S. Army Special Forces soldier who had earned the Silver Star during his service in 1971. To enter the biker world, he created a new identity called Billy St. John, growing out a long beard, riding a Harley-Davidson, and fully immersing himself in outlaw biker culture. Getting inside the Mongols was extremely dangerous from the beginning. As a prospect, Queen constantly faced loyalty tests from violent gang members heavily involved in drugs, weapons, and organized crime. Every conversation could expose him. Every mistake could get him killed. To maintain his cover, Queen had to witness and sometimes participate in motorcycle thefts, narcotic steals, gun trafficking, and getaway operations. One failed background check or one slip of the tongue could have ended with his execution. But somehow, he survived it. Despite living around constant violence, discussions of murders, and gang rapes tied to the club's criminal activity, Queen successfully gained the Mongols' trust. Eventually, he became a fully patched member and later rose to the position of chapter treasurer. That role gave him access to financial records, internal meetings, and evidence tied to the club's multi-state criminal operations. But the deeper Queen went undercover, the more psychologically trapped he became. Because the mission required complete separation from his normal life, the Mongols slowly became his only support system. Over time, the men he was investigating started treating him like family, and that emotional conflict nearly destroyed him. Queen later admitted, "I had no doubt these guys genuinely loved Billy St. John and would have laid down their lives for him. But they wouldn't hesitate to murder Billy Queen." That internal struggle became even worse when Queen's mother died during the operation. According to Queen, many of his ATF superiors failed to provide meaningful emotional support after, but members of the Mongols approached him personally, offering sympathy, condolences, and genuine brotherhood. The experience left lasting emotional damage. Queen knew he was preparing to betray men who truly believed he was one of them, and that guilt followed him long after the operation ended. But federal authorities also learned something important from Queen's infiltration. Arresting a few individual members wasn't enough. If they wanted to seriously damage the Mongols' organization, they needed a much larger operation. That realization led directly to Operation Black Rain. Unlike Queen's solo infiltration, Operation Black Rain used multiple undercover agents working together inside the Mongols' organization. 4 male ATF agents successfully became full-patch Mongols members, while 4 female agents posed as their girlfriends to help strengthen their cover stories and avoid suspicion. The scrutiny was intense. The undercover agents reportedly endured polygraph tests, surveillance, and background investigations conducted by private investigators hired by the Mongols themselves. Then, on October 22, 2008, the operation finally exploded into action. More than 1,000 federal agents and local police officers launched coordinated raids across California, Nevada, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, and Ohio. Authorities executed 110 arrest warrants and 160 search warrants in one of the largest biker gang crackdowns in U.S. history. Among the 61 high-ranking Mongols members arrested was National President Ruben Doc Cavazos. Federal prosecutors charged members under the RICO Act with crimes that included murder, attempted murder, assault, narcotics trafficking, and money laundering. During the raids, authorities seized methamphetamine, illegal firearms, bulletproof vests, and large amounts of cash. Eventually, Cavazos pleaded guilty to leading a continuing criminal enterprise. He admitted involvement in coordinating murders, torture, and large-scale drug trafficking operations. He was later sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. The Trademark War, erasing the Mongol identity after Operation Black Rain, brought down dozens of high-ranking members of the Mongols Motorcycle Club. Federal authorities decided to try something nobody had ever attempted before. They didn't just want arrests, they wanted to erase the Mongols completely. And the government believed the best way to do that was by taking away the club's identity itself. The plan came from U.S. Attorney Thomas O'Brien, who introduced a legal strategy so aggressive that it shocked both biker gangs and constitutional law experts across the country. Instead of focusing only on prison sentences, federal prosecutors tried to seize ownership of the Mongols' official logo and name. At the center of the fight was the club's famous symbol, the ponytailed Mongol warrior riding a chopper. Because the Mongols had legally registered that logo with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, prosecutors argued the trademark counted as property belonging to a criminal organization. And under federal asset forfeiture laws, the government can seize property connected to criminal enterprises. Their argument was simple. If authorities can confiscate a drug dealer's mansion, cash, or luxury cars, then they should also be able to confiscate a biker gang's trademark. It was a legal move unlike anything seen before. But the government's attempt to destroy the Mongols' identity quickly turned into a massive constitutional battle that lasted more than a decade. Civil rights groups, especially the Aklu of San Diego and Imperial County, stepped into the fight alongside Mongols members who had never even been charged with crimes. One of the most visible was Ramon Rivera, an unindicted Mongols member who argued the patches and logo represented more than criminal activity. According to Rivera, many members, especially low-income Latino bikers, viewed the Mongols' insignia as a symbol of identity, brotherhood, recognition, and equality. The legal defense argued that the government was trying to violate the First Amendment by restricting freedom of expression and association. They claimed prosecutors were attempting to punish hundreds of people who had never been convicted of any crime simply because they wore Mongols' colors. In other words, the case wasn't just about biker gangs anymore. It had become a fight over constitutional rights. Then came a major setback for the Department of Justice. In both 2009 and 2011, Judge David O. Carter blocked parts of the government's seizure attempts. He warned that confiscating symbols from people who weren't charged with crimes raised serious First Amendment concerns and appeared to go far beyond normal forfeiture laws. But federal prosecutors refused to back down. Instead, they changed strategies entirely. In 2013, the Department of Justice did something unprecedented. They indicted the Mongol nation itself as an organization under the RICO Act, rather than focusing only on individual members. That move changed the legal battlefield once again. Then, in December 2018, a federal jury ruled against the Mongol nation, finding the organization guilty of racketeering and conspiracy. Jurors specifically concluded that the club's trademark logos and membership symbols were directly connected to criminal activity. For a moment, it looked like the government might finally succeed. But only a few months later, everything changed again. On February 28, 2019, Judge David O. Carter officially denied the government's attempt to seize the Mongols' trademark. His ruling became one of the most important legal victories the Mongols had ever won. Judge Carter stated that forcing ownership of a collective membership symbol over to the United States government violated the First Amendment. He explained that the Mongols patch wasn't just a corporate logo, it represented membership and association, making it fundamentally different from ordinary property. According to Carter, allowing the government to destroy or confiscate symbols tied to membership groups could create a dangerous nationwide precedent that would chill free speech far beyond biker gangs. And he didn't stop there. The judge also ruled that the forfeiture violated the Eighth Amendment's protection against excessive punishment. He described the government's attempt to completely erase the Mongols' identity as harsh and grossly disproportionate compared to the crimes committed by individual members. Then, Carter raised another controversial issue. He openly questioned why the Department of Justice targeted the symbol of what he described as a largely Latino motorcycle club, while avoiding similar trademark actions against rival biker organizations in previous cases. That comment added even more tension to an already explosive case. Still, federal prosecutors weren't ready to surrender. The government appealed the decision to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and introduced a new strategy. Instead of asking to own the trademark outright, prosecutors proposed simply dissolving it completely. Their logic was this: if nobody legally owned the Mongols logo anymore, then anyone could print it, sell it, or wear it without violating trademark laws. Prosecutors argued that this approach would avoid the free speech problems tied to direct government ownership. But Mongol Nation attorney George Steele warned the idea could lead to violence almost immediately. According to Steele, outlaw biker gangs enforce control over their patches through intimidation and force, not just legal paperwork. If random civilians suddenly started wearing Mongols patches, confrontations would likely follow. Steele argued, it's a very good way to promote violence if you say, we're going to make it open season for anybody who wants to infringe on the Mongols' marks, and make sure you can't be sued for doing so. Some Mongol who feels strongly about his right of association may have a lapse in judgment. The legal war continued for years. Then, On January 6, 2023, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals delivered the final blow to the government's strategy. A three-judge panel unanimously sided against the Department of Justice. Interestingly, the appellate judges avoided making a broad constitutional ruling. Instead, they focused on the wording of the RICO forfeiture laws themselves. Judge Holly Thomas, writing for the panel, explained that the law only allows the government to seize property and transfer ownership to itself. It does not allow prosecutors to simply destroy intellectual property rights without taking ownership. Because the government wanted to eliminate the trademark rather than officially possess it, the entire forfeiture strategy failed legally. The criminal racketeering conviction against the Mongol nation still remained intact, but the club kept ownership of its famous ponytailed warrior logo. For the Mongols, it became one of the biggest symbolic victories in the club's history. And for the federal government, it marked a major defeat in its attempt to use trademark law as a weapon against outlaw biker organizations. Comparison of government infiltration strategies as the war between the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and the Mongols Motorcycle Club intensified. Federal law enforcement realized that normal policing methods simply weren't enough anymore. These weren't loose street crews. They were highly secretive organizations built around loyalty, hierarchy, fear, and silence. To break into those inner circles, the ATF and other federal agencies turned to deep cover infiltration tactics. But the operations used against biker gangs evolved dramatically over time. Early undercover missions focused on embedding a single agent inside a chapter for intelligence gathering. Later operations became much larger, more coordinated, and designed to dismantle entire criminal networks at once. The infiltration of the Mongols by undercover ATF agent William Queen became one of the most famous examples of old-school deep-cover policing. Queen spent years building trust inside the organization, under the biker identity Billy St. John, eventually becoming a fully patched member and chapter treasurer. His operation relied almost entirely on personal. Queen lived the biker lifestyle every single day, surrounded by violent men who constantly tested his loyalty. The strategy depended on emotional manipulation, patience, and surviving long enough to gain access to the club's internal operations. But federal authorities eventually realized that infiltrating one chapter wasn't enough to cripple organizations operating across multiple states. That lesson directly influenced Operation Black Rain. Unlike Queen's mostly solo infiltration, Black Rain used multiple undercover agents working together simultaneously. Male agents infiltrated the Mongols as bikers, while female ATF agents posed as girlfriends to strengthen their cover stories and help bypass suspicion. The operation became far more structured and militarized than earlier undercover efforts. Instead of only collecting intelligence, Black Rain was designed to build massive federal RICO cases, capable of taking down leadership structures across several states at once. And in many ways, it succeeded. The raids tied to Operation Black Rain resulted in huge arrests, major narcotics seizures, and prison sentences for high-ranking members, including Mongols president Ruben Doc Cavazos. But the operation also revealed something uncomfortable for law enforcement. Even when leadership was dismantled, the clubs themselves survived. The brotherhood culture, local chapters, and street-level loyalty remained intact, allowing the organizations to continue operating even after federal crackdowns. And that's exactly why the conflict still exists today. The modern battleground, global franchises, and workplace violence, the end of the trademark war, didn't end the violence between the Hells Angels and the Mongols. If anything, the feud has become more unpredictable than ever. Federal crackdowns weakened many of the centralized leadership structures that once controlled both organizations. But instead of stopping the violence, that decentralization created something even harder to manage: smaller local chapters operating with more independence and less oversight. Today, flare-ups happen fast, often triggered by personal disputes tied to club loyalty rather than direct orders from national leadership. One major example reportedly happened in June 2025 at a commercial construction site. According to reports, two workers, one allegedly linked to the Hells Angels and the other connected to the Mongols, became involved in an argument tied to biker club politics. The dispute escalated quickly into a violent stabbing attack that left two men hospitalized, including one fighting for his life. Another individual later faced attempted murder charges. What made the incident especially alarming was the location. Historically, biker wars mostly stayed inside biker spaces, bars, highways, clubhouses, or organized rallies. But now, the hatred between rival clubs has become so deeply personal that members increasingly carry it directly into ordinary workplaces and public life. The patch no longer stays separate from daily life, and law enforcement agencies know the danger hasn't disappeared. In March 2025, another major outbreak of biker violence reportedly happened during Bike Week in Volusia County, Florida. During the massive motorcycle event, a shootout erupted at a racetrack gas station in New Smyrna Beach, involving Mongols members and the Warlocks Motorcycle Club, a regional ally connected to the Hells Angels. The violence immediately triggered a large multi-agency crackdown called Operation Mongolian Beef, led by the Volusia Sheriff's Office alongside the FBI. The operation targeted both the Mongols and the Warlocks, and eventually resulted in at least 28 arrests, highlighting growing concerns about biker gang violence during major motorcycle rallies that attract tens of thousands of visitors every year. Then came another reminder that highways are still active battlegrounds in the biker world. On April 25, 2026, a member of the Mongol Brotherhood was reportedly targeted in a shooting along West Loop 250 in Midland, Texas. According to reports, shots were fired from a nearby vehicle while the rider traveled at highway speed. The biker crashed after being hit multiple times and was hospitalized with serious injuries. The attack showed that some of the old methods of biker warfare never disappeared. Major highways remain highly contested territory where rival members can still become targets in what investigators often describe as execution-style attacks. But the conflict is no longer limited to America. As law enforcement pressure increased inside the United States, both the Hells Angels and the Mongols aggressively expanded overseas using a franchise-style model. Smaller local motorcycle clubs in foreign countries were absorbed into larger international networks tied to the two organizations. One of the biggest examples came in Australia. In 2013, the Mongols launched a highly publicized expansion into the country by absorbing an established local biker club. That move disrupted the balance of power inside Australia's outlaw biker scene and intensified conflicts with long-established Hells Angels and Bandidos motorcycle club chapters. Much of the violence reportedly centered around control of South Pacific drug trafficking routes and underground criminal markets. The war had officially gone global. Conclusions: the conflict between the Hells Angels and the Mongols became far bigger than a simple territorial biker feud. Over the last 50 years, it evolved into a violent struggle tied to organized crime, racial identity, drug trafficking, prison gang alliances, and even constitutional law. What started in Southern California during the post-war biker era eventually transformed into an international conflict involving criminal networks worth millions of dollars. One of the biggest turning points came when leaders like Ruben Doc Cavazos changed the makeup of the Mongols by recruiting heavily from Southern California street gang. Traditional biker culture slowly gave way to a more aggressive street gang mentality built around prison connections, narcotics trafficking, and rapid violence. That shift changed the rules completely. Older outlaw biker traditions, including keeping violence away from families or neutral public spaces, started disappearing. The result was increasingly reckless violence in places like charity events, casinos, restaurants, and public streets. The war also exposed the limits of federal prosecution. Despite years of investigations, undercover operations, and massive RICO indictments, the federal government failed in its attempt to erase the Mongols' identity through trademark law. Courts repeatedly ruled that even controversial organizations still held constitutional protections involving expression and association. In many ways, that legal fight became just as historic as the violence itself. At the same time, undercover operations revealed how powerful biker brotherhood culture could become psychologically. Agents like William Queen described forming real emotional bonds with men they were secretly investigating, showing how deeply loyalty and identity shape outlaw motorcycle clubs from the inside. And today, the conflict still shows no real signs of ending. The older generation of biker leadership is slowly fading away, replaced by younger and more decentralized members heavily influenced by street gangs and international narcotics networks. They operate across borders, move through criminal alliances, and continue carrying the same rivalries that started decades ago on California highways. Armed with money, weapons, international connections, and legally protected club symbols, the Hells Angels and the Mongols remain locked in one of the longest-running and deadliest biker wars in American history.